Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue. As we begin our meeting today, and on behalf of Ottawa City Council, I wish to acknowledge that Ottawa is built on unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory. Ottawa est aménagé sur le territoire non cédé de la nation.
Ottawa is built on unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory. The peoples of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land.
Algonquin Nation and honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. Avant que nous prenions un moment de silence, je tiens à souligner deux événements.
Before we pause for a moment of silence, I want to acknowledge two significant events for our city.
A couple of significant events in our city. Tout d'abord, le féminicide.
First, the horrible and tragic femicide of Brechti Berhe.
Femicide of Brechti Berhe, which has shocked neighbors and people throughout our community.
Qui a laissé tout le monde en état.
Members at a vigil in Paul Landry Park to honor her life. Councillor Brockington, you spoke very well, as did members of the community at that event. I spoke with members of her family and offered support on behalf of the City of Ottawa. Our thoughts are with her 4 children and the other members of her family who are experiencing tremendous loss and grief right now. I also wanted to mark the passing of Andrew Haydon, an extraordinary leader and public servant, and of course the person after whom this very council chamber is named. Andy a servi notre communauté pendant des décennies et a laissé un impact.
He served our community for decades and had an extraordinary impact on our city.
The Reeve and then the mayor of Nepean and then the regional chair of the regional municipality of Ottawa-Carleton. And even in retirement, as I think a lot of us know, he was very, very passionate about our city and about local issues. And I want to extend sincere condolences to his wife, Sherry, to his children, his grandchildren, and the many friends and family that he leaves behind. So now, if you were able, please rise for a moment of personal reflection. Thank you. Merci. Please remain standing. Et je vais laisser la parole à
I'll now give the microphone to Councillor Dudas, who will introduce the people that will sing our national anthem. I'm honored to present to you the Chansonniers d'Ottawa. It's a francophone group that was founded in the eastern part of Ottawa in 1974. By François de L'Île Julien. Since they sang many, many songs, they give shows, and they shared the stage with some of the best-known singers of Canada.
17 months that we've ever had in council chambers, and I'm sure she will steal the show. At their last show, in celebration of their 50th anniversary, they sold out the Shankman Arts Centre. And if you would like to catch more of Les Chansonniers after this performance, you can catch them at the Shankman Christmas Market on December 7th and again on December 15th at St. Marie Church. Sans plus tarder, joignez-vous à moi.
Without any further ado, please join me to listen to Les Chansonniers d'Ottawa.
In all hearts soir est une épopée des plus brillants exploits d'un qui pardonne, glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Merci à les chansonniers. C'est bien
Thank you
apprécié.
to the chansonnier. Very appreciated.
I will now ask the council coordinator to do the roll call, please.
Councillor Lula.
Councillor Lula?
Present.
Councillor Dudas.
Present.
Councillor Hill.
Present.
Councillor Curry.
Here.
Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Councillor Gower.
Here.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Present.
Councillor Johnson.
Here.
Councillor Devine.
Here.
Councillor Bradley.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Councillor Plante.
Ici.
Councillor King.
Here.
Councillor Troster.
Here.
Councillor Leeper.
Good morning.
Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Councillor Menard.
Here.
Councillor Carr.
Here.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor DeRuse.
Here.
Councillor Brown.
Here.
Councillor DeRush.
Here.
Councillor Hewley.
Here.
Councillor Lowe.
Here.
Mayor Sutcliffe.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Confirmation of minutes from our meeting on the 16th of October. Are the minutes carried? Are there any declarations of interest? I will note the communications on the agenda. Motion to introduce reports. Councillor Hughley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. That the Built Heritage Committee Report 18A, Community Services Committee Report 12, the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee Report 14, the Environment and Climate Change Committee Report 13, the Planning and Housing Committee Report 35A and 35-6, the Transportation Committee Report 15, and the reports from the City Clerk entitled Status Update, Council Inquiries and Motions for the period ending October 25th, 2024, and the summary of oral and written public submissions for items subject to the Planning Act explanation requirements at the City Council meeting of October 16th, 2024, be received and considered.
Is that carried? Thank you. Item 10, Office of the City Clerk, the status update on council inquiries and motions for the period ending October 25th. Is that received? From the Built Heritage Committee, item 11.1, designation of the Campanile campus. Is that carried? Community Services Committee, item 12.1, Ottawa's Poverty Reduction Strategy 2025 to 2029. We'd like that held? Okay, hold that. Item 12.2, Canada Ontario Community Housing Benefits 2024-25. Is that carried? From Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee, item 13.1 is the review of potential regulations for vapor product retailers. Is that carried? 13.2 is the Public Safety Service Annual Report. Is that carried? 13.3 is the 911 Annual Report. Is that received? Item 14.1 is the Solid Waste Services Bylaw Update. I know there are a couple of motions related to that, so we'll hold that. Item 15.1 is the Omnibus 2 Official Plan Amendment, and there's a couple of motions related to that, so we'll hold that. From Planning and Housing Committee, item 16.1, zoning bylaw amendment for 1495 Heron Road. Is that carried? Item 16.2 is the 2024 Development Charge Background Study Amendment Report and Bylaws. I know Councillor DeRuse has a direction, but otherwise, are people okay to go ahead with that? If so, we'll just do the direction and then carry the report. Go ahead.
Thank you,
Councillor
Mr. Mayor.
DeRuse.
It will be very quick, and after speaking with our staff, and I want to thank Suze Jones and her team for collaboration concerning the current urban expansion, as well other potential future in the area. So I direct staff to be directed to support identification of the Day 1 Water and Waste Master Project to service the tailwind lands identified within the current urban boundary, while ensuring that the IMP solutions that service beyond 2046 planning horizon are not precluded in the future. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Is the item carried then? Item 17, Transportation Committee Report, 17.1, Fee Review, Municipal Consent, Utility Circulation, Road Cut Permit, and Temporary Road Closure. Is that carried? Item 17.2 is minor amendments to the Traffic and Parking Bylaw to enhance accessible parking opportunities. Is that carried? And the bulk consent agenda, is that carried? Okay, going back to item 12.1, Ottawa's Poverty Reduction Strategy 2025 to 2029. Councillor Kavanagh?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The concern is that has been raised by Just Food is the terminology of food insecurity as being a major driver in this report, rather than staying on the positive of food security. And this has come up a number of times. It's about moving forward on looking at the food security system. And I want to ask staff if we're looking at the food security system as a whole.
Thank you for the question, Mayor. Yes, the food insecurity lens language has been removed from the final version of the poverty reduction strategy, which was circulated as part of the committee report. And food security systems are contemplated in the strategy, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's it. Thank you. Councillor King.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to reiterate my strong support for Ottawa's first comprehensive poverty reduction strategy in a decade. I want to really thank staff for the hard work that they've undertaken on this strategy, which really represents a crucial step forward in our commitment to create a more equitable and inclusive city for all residents. What makes this strategy different is its comprehensive collaborative approach. Through extensive consultation with over 350 participants representing more than 70 organizations, the city has developed a framework that will address poverty's root causes through 5 key pillars, which we had heard during committee: food security, employment, financial security, employment development, economic development, and integrated service pathways. And I just wanted to note that I'm particularly proud of the community organizations that contributed to this strategy. The community associations in Ward 13, as well as in Vanier and in Ward 12, as an example, came together to form what they called a community collective and developed thoughtful recommendations that have been incorporated into this plan. Their message was clear: we need to move beyond treating symptoms to addressing root causes. The strategy takes a collective impact approach, bringing together the city, community organizations, and residents to work together towards shared goals. It recognizes that no single organization or program can solve poverty alone. We need coordinated action across sectors, guided by those with lived experience of poverty. The immediate actions proposed for 2025-2026 will begin making a difference quickly, including increased funding for mentorship programs for Indigenous, Black, and racialized youth, improving coordination of food security initiatives, and increased coordination of tax clinics to help low-income residents access benefits they're entitled to. The $150,000 in one-time funding to support tax clinic coordination is a smart investment, but ultimately more money should be put into this initiative to help residents access millions of dollars in available benefits and credits that translate into immediate material improvement. The strategy sets an ambitious goal to reduce poverty by 30% by 2030. While ambitious, this type of bold goal setting is exactly what we need. As the community collective noted, poverty is expensive for our city in healthcare costs, social services, and lost economic potential. By taking coordinated action now, we can improve lives while reducing long-term costs. This strategy aligns with other city priorities and plans, including our strategic plan, the anti-racism strategy, and the women and gender equity strategy. It provides a roadmap for how we can work together as a community to reduce poverty and create more opportunities for all Ottawa residents. Colleagues, we have before us a strategy developed through extensive community consultation, grounded in evidence, and focused on measurable outcomes. It represents our best opportunity to make meaningful progress in reducing poverty in our city. It is a great win for our city and deserves our immediate and continuing support. And I'd also like to note that we had recognized the late Diane Deans just over the last week. And I know the amount of work that she undertook to really set the pathway for this poverty reduction strategy was extensive at her time at Crime Prevention Ottawa, where we worked on the first steering committee that directed the focus to be on poverty reduction. So I thought it would be remiss of us not to recognize our late colleague. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much, Mayor. For those of you who were not at Community Services Committee when we discussed this strategy, I need you to know it was one of the most devastating days I have ever experienced. There were about 20 different food security, food bank organizations that came to City Council, and the message was that people in Ottawa are hungrier than they've ever been. 35% of food bank users in our city are children. The food bank in my ward, well, I have 3 of them, and they're seeing a 30% per year increase in usage year over year. The Ottawa Food Bank has seen a nearly 90% increase in usage since 2019. So I just wanted to highlight the 2 major asks that came out of that committee that I hope we will seriously consider as part of our budget process. One from the Ottawa Food Bank was an immediate injection of $5.6 million just to keep community food centers afloat. They are going to the food bank is going to have the amount of food that they are giving to all of their partner organizations. So that means children will go without dinner. It means kids will go to school without packed lunches. And another spillover effect that we heard from community organizations is that they can't do all of the other things that they used to do for the community, whether it's homework clubs or field trips or sports activities for youth, because they're focusing almost entirely on food. Even organizations that didn't have a mandate before to have a food bank, they are running food banks off the side of their desks. So I hope we will take this seriously. The other piece is, yes, there is a recommendation in this report to spend $150,000 to help bolster community income tax clinics. The ask from the community is 10 times that. And just to be clear, if we invested I believe it's $1.7 million that they're asking for, it would bring in more than $75 million in provincial and federal benefits for residents who are currently eligible and not accessing those benefits. So these are the poorest people in our city who are not accessing income support that they are owed and are therefore going to food banks because they're hungry. And so I just really wanted to highlight these 2 very strong demands that came out of the sector. That's certainly where some of my advocacy will lie with the next budget. And the other thing I'll say is we can't meaningfully address poverty without federal and provincial action and without a real raise to social assistance rates. I was really struck by something that one delegate said when they came to committee, which was during the pandemic, the federal government determined that $2,000 a month was the minimum income that people could live on. That's what the CERB payments were. And right now, social assistance and disability rates are less than half that per month for a single person. So how on earth are people supposed to survive? So anyway, I want to thank staff for all the hard work and all of the community partners who put this strategy together. I just fear that it's all words and no action if we don't have money behind it. And if we're serious about fighting poverty in this city, I think the two things that we can do are, number one, invest in income tax clinics to make sure people are getting the benefits that they're owed, so they're not coming to charity to ask for basic provisions, and also to support our community food center. I want to see the day when food banks have to close, but right now they're struggling to stay open, and that's a real indictment of where we're failing on many, many levels. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Councillor Desroches.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. I did listen attentively at committee to the delegations and to the discussions there on the policy framework, which I support today. I thought it was interesting on kind of the twisted irony that a municipal government would be taking on, pushing, or encouraging others to fill out taxes for another level of government. And I certainly understand why we would do that. I'm just wondering if there's other opportunities to encourage people to complete their taxes, their income taxes. I heard, I think, at that meeting that there's some reticence because potentially you might owe money, but likely in the case of many people, they will benefit from them. So I'm wondering, when we have intake, for example, at Ottawa Community Housing, or when we have an intake through some of our social services, do we have the opportunity at that point to strongly encourage residents to see the benefits of completing their income tax and pointing them in the right direction to get assistance to do that? I've raised it before on screening for veterans, that when people come into OCH, for example, that they would be screened as a veteran potentially, so that they would be eligible for veterans benefits that they may be aware of. So what opportunity exists at the entry point for interactions with the city for social services to potentially encourage residents to complete their taxes and benefit again from a number of tax credits and what have you are there to help address poverty and hunger in our community? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Mayor. Yes, Councillor, thank you. And I believe that there would be opportunity to reinforce the need for tax filing with people who are coming into any part of the system. OCH is a good example. What the $150 investment would do is bring an extra level of coordination and outreach to augment the outreach that already exists and the level of support that exists to not only inform people, but literally walk people to income tax clinics, those who may have mental health issues or other barriers to doing that themselves. And so that's the level of effort. And then the other opportunity, of course, at the renewal of any kind of income support program, you must produce a record of assessment. And so that's another opportunity to reinforce that message with clients.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope you'll take it away. And I will support some level of tax clinic support, but we need people walking through the door because they see the advantage of doing that. And they are convinced, I think, through our interventions that this will likely result in a positive situation in their taxation or some benefit in that. So I do believe that type of encouragement at point of entry is I think, time well spent. So thank you for taking that into consideration. That's all, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Desroches. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Mayor. And first, I just want to acknowledge and thank everyone who contributed to the poverty reduction strategy that's before us. I know the committee and my colleagues who sit on the committee heard from many service providers and community leaders last week, and I appreciate the strategy before us, and I will be supporting the strategy. And in particular, I want to thank Councillors King and Troster for their comments this morning. My question just piggybacks on what we've heard already this morning and what colleagues heard at the committee meeting last week, and that is, should the food bank reduce its ability to support these community food centers, what the plan is? And there's a lot of concern, I know, across the city, in particular in my ward, My ward historically has had, 3 family houses, Caldwell, Deborah Dines, and Banff Ledbury, operate food banks within those centers. Just this year, we opened a 4th food bank in Riverside Park, actually very close to where I live, out of Brookfield High School, and that's taken off. And there's a church that operates outside of River Ward, but on the first Saturday of the month offer basically a pickup service out of the Hunt Club Riverside Park Community Center. And the line before they open is through the parking lot and onto the sidewalk. So if anyone doubts whether or not we have a crisis or emergency, a food crisis in this city, look no further than the food banks, the community-based food banks that operate in Ottawa, and the statistics that the food bank are producing and sharing for us. So my question to the general manager is, where do we go from here? The draft budget is going to be released at our very next council meeting. We'll see details there, but I don't think the City of Ottawa can solve this challenge on its own. We absolutely need other levels of government, private sector to step up. Could you share this morning, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The food issue, food insecurity, food inflation is real, as you say, Councillor. And the poverty reduction strategy gives us a framework to continue some of the excellent work that we're doing, both as a municipality and as a community collectively. That includes existing investments and contemplating inflationary increases in the upcoming budget, as well as an additional consumer price index provision specifically for those agencies working to serve, working in the food sector and in food bank sector. The other key focus of the strategy is to work on other concrete initiatives that increase the ability for people living in poverty to increase access to service, increase income, and other activities that then would prevent people from needing to access food banks. And many of the programs that we're already funding and investing in are also part of that puzzle. So I can point to my colleagues' Hand in Hand program through recreation and other initiatives such as our community hubs initiatives, our work coming out of employment and social services on employment. So those are all part of this collective impact approach. And over time, we hope to see good progress in alleviating the impacts of poverty, which, as you say, are very really and concretely felt in this community.
Thank you for that. I think there's a myth out there that the poorest of the poor are the only recipients of what food banks provide. We're seeing people who work, who have never had to draw on social services before in their life, now standing in line to get food because the food they can, and I'll put this in quotes, afford to buy is simply not enough. They need to supplement that. And so I recognize the strategy is sort of a macro approach with many different subcomponents and pieces, and I agree with you that combined over time that should alleviate the poverty numbers in the city, but right now the growth is exponential. And so I think that many community partners are looking to the city to contribute financially and other as early as next year. And so when the draft budget comes out, I'll be looking to see what we're doing in this regard, but I think there's going to be some very tough conversations that are going to happen over the next month to ensure that the people of Ottawa have the very basics, including food, going forward. So, Mayor, I just want to say I strongly support the strategy before us today, but I'm certainly hearing loud and clear that food security is a top priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the work in putting forward the strategy, which I am pleased to support. But I do want to echo some of the comments by my colleagues, in particular the comments about the proper amount of investment in income tax clinics and the return on investment that could come from that. And I'm certainly grateful to see the $150,000 being proposed for this year, but I know that is around the same figure that had been requested by community resource centers last year. I had been working with a consortium of community resource centers last year that had been looking to have that kind of investment that would have already been in place. And I suppose the somewhat bitter irony of the fact that it wasn't in place last year, even in driving in this morning and hearing the details about Premier Ford's decision, the Ford government's decision to issue $200 checks to Ottawa residents, a very significant $3 billion provincial investment. While I may have questions about that decision to begin with, I would be supportive of the fact that that money would be going to those who need it most. But the irony is that to receive that $200 rebate check, you need to have filed your income tax. And so we may have now a rare opportunity to inject public funds to those who need it most, but we have missed that opportunity for those monies to go into residents in my ward's hands now. So I certainly appreciate the fact that we're making a change now. However, I wish we could be more proactive in anticipating the social trends that are before us. But on the issue of what is being proposed, the $150,000, and trying to leverage private sector support. So as I've heard from other colleagues, we could certainly benefit from greater private sector support and investment in this. It does not all necessarily have to come from the public purse, although I wish more could. But on the area of what could the city do to incentivize, advocate, request, cajole, pressure, private sector to be more involved? Are there any initiatives that the city is tangibly being involved in to get more private sector support to help more of these income tax forms being submitted?
Mr. Mayor, the approach being taken in the proposed report is to work with the community to actually do that. So ensure that there's a sustainable approach to coordinating the efforts that already exist. So we provide income tax clinics through our Employment and Social Services group. We fund income tax clinics, but the community is also contributing to that work. And so we want to coordinate those efforts. And part of that coordination is absolutely reaching out to private sector. We have had experience where accountants, for instance, in private practice do annually have a priority of giving back to the community, and that's a perfect example of the kinds of activities that they would participate in. So there is a experience behind that approach, and we will work with the community to ensure that outreach to private sector is part of the plan.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much. Just listening to the debate, I want to make sure that it's clear with respect to income tax clinics, the hurdle that those address. I'm not sure that the problem is that people just don't want to file their taxes or don't see the value in it. Certainly from the community members in Kitchissippi who are volunteers for tax clinics, what they're telling me the value is that doing taxes is hard. Many of us around this table probably try to figure out, struggle sometimes to figure out how to file our taxes properly. Claire, is it accurate to say that the problem that tax clinics try to address is to remove some of the barriers of just how hard doing taxes can be sometimes?
Mayor, yes, that would be accurate.
Yeah. It's, I'm sure there are lots of people who would love to have their taxes filed in order to receive the various different benefits that are out there, be it climate checks or Christmas checks from the Premier, but the clinics are critical in order to be able to ensure that people are actually able to do that. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Is the item carried then? Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Moving to item 14.1, the solid waste services bylaw update. I know there are a couple of motions, so perhaps we can introduce those now, starting with Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Whereas the proposed solid waste services bylaw provides that owners of agricultural properties with a residential property on site eligible for curbside collection services shall be exempt from the set-out limit applicable to garbage as outlined in Schedule B from April 1st to May 31st every year, And whereas in the solid waste services bylaw, farm waste and agricultural waste is defined as any waste that is the normal byproduct of farming operations generated by farm operation activities, including but not limited to plastic haylage wrappings, bale twine and rope, and plastic drainage tiles. And whereas some agricultural operators who receive curbside collection have expressed concerns about how the seasonal agricultural exemption is insufficient for disposal of unavoidable farm waste, therefore be it resolved that staff defer the implementation of the 2-month exemption period for unavoidable farm waste as described in Section 8(2) of the Solid Waste Services Bylaw for 1 year from December 2024 to December 2025. And be it further resolved that subsection 8(2) of the proposed Solid Waste Services Bylaw outlined in Document 1 be amended to read as follows to provide for a year-round exemption. Owners of agricultural properties with a residential property on site eligible for curbside collection services shall be exempt from the garbage set-out limit as outlined in Schedule B for applicable farm waste and agricultural waste only. Be it further resolved that staff be directed to further engage with the agricultural community on the needs of farmers related to unavoidable farm waste and report back on their findings and any proposed changes to the agricultural exemption in the bylaw as part of the annual update on curbside diversion set out for Q4 of 2025.
Okay, did you want to speak to that, Councillor Brown?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This has been a team effort, Mr. Mayor. Certainly Councillor Deroux, Councillor Kitts, Councillor Kelly, and Councillor Luloff have all provided feedback. It's a team effort for rural Ottawa, and I'd also like to thank staff both in the clerk's office and solid waste services. We heard loud and clear from the farmers that livestock eats every day, and this waste doesn't come about because they don't want to change. There are no other options, and I think this is a great step, certainly with the agricultural community, for the city to take the time to learn how we can serve these residents and their operations while still moving forward with reducing Ottawa's waste. Again, Mr. Mayor, the support that I received from my rural colleagues in your office is greatly appreciated, and certainly willing to answer any question from our colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. And Councillor Kelly, did you want to introduce your motion?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Whereas on June 14th, 2023, City Council approved amended staff recommendations with respect to curbside waste diversion in the City of Ottawa, lowering the garbage put-out limits for curbside household to 3 limits bi-weekly. And whereas solid waste services are currently in the process of implementing a phased rollout of the new 3-item limit, with the final phase to begin in December 2024. And whereas some residents in Ottawa have had oversized bins that historically have been collected at their laneways with no enforcement action taken by collectors, and many residents were likely not even aware of the already approved 140-litre limit for containers that was in place prior to the shift to the 3-item limit. And whereas residents who are receiving non-compliance courtesy tags during phased enforcement periods are reporting that although their bins are oversized, they're putting out a lesser volume of garbage than would be permitted in 3 separate containers totaling 420 litres of garbage. And whereas it is difficult for residents to even locate bins that can contain the maximum volume of up to 140 litres as described in the city's bylaw, have already owned these bins for a period of time. And whereas it would be beneficial to allow for additional time for residents to be able to locate different bins on the open market once they are available, instead of having to adapt to the 3-item limit and the need for smaller bins at the same time. And whereas solid waste services staff are also in the process of looking at options available for the disposal of these oversized bins, given that they are not going to be accepted for collection. Therefore, be it resolved that solid waste staff be directed to ensure that residents that are using bins larger than 140 litres or 33 pounds continue to receive curbside collection for a temporary period of up to 6 months, so long as the maximum capacity within the bin does not exceed the total 3-item capacity of 420 litres or 99 pounds. And be it further resolved that during this 6-month period, solid waste collectors place a courtesy non-compliance tag on bins that do not comply with the Solid Waste Services Bylaw, indicating that there is a temporary exemption being granted in order to educate residents that they will need to locate different bins. Be it further resolved that after this temporary period, the maximum capacity would continue to be 140 litres or 33-pound bins as described in the Solid Waste Service Bylaw. appreciate the fact that this conversation is happening. I will echo Councillor Brown's remarks in terms of this being a team effort from rural Ottawa. But I also, based on some conversations this morning that I've had with some of my colleagues, realize that other councillors have been receiving complaints about this particular restriction and the rollout of it and enforcement. And I want to be clear that this is not about at all dialing back the curbside limit that we put in place last June. That was a 22 decision, and I'm not under any illusions that we'll convince council to overturn that, although I probably have some residents who would like us to do that. But what I think we do have here is an opportunity to correct an oversight by at least providing a 6-month exemption on enforcement of bin size and lid restrictions. I do understand and am sensitive to the health and safety concerns that have been raised by operators, but these bins have been successfully collected for a decade at least with this bylaw in place. And we're now about to enforce this limit with no real viable options available for people to buy these commercially. One of the reasons that people use these bins is to keep wildlife out. They're made of a thicker plastic. They have wheels. Oftentimes in the rural setting, you're going down a very long driveway. This can be very tedious for elderly people particularly. And these bins really do help keep wildlife out. And there is no comparable bin at the 140-liter limit available currently. And I think it would be more fair for the city to allow there to be multiple options commercially for people available before enforcing this. I think maybe I'll end there. I think it would be a fair approach to allow people to continue to use their oversized bins, at least until there are some available for them to buy. I'll leave it there and we'll open it up for debate, and I'll have some closing arguments and questions after. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. So just before we get to questions or comments from councillors, maybe I'll just ask staff to comment on the two motions that are before us, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So on first the Councillor Brown motion, we appreciate the collaboration with the councillor to make some revisions to the original motion itself to bring it in line with something that staff could support. So we would definitely support that motion. In terms of the Councillor Kelly motion, we also appreciate the work with Councillor Kelly. Unfortunately, it's not one that staff would be able to support. A couple of reasons. One is when we're looking at these bins that are over 140 liters, they're really carts. We're talking about typically 240 plus liter bins. The bins themselves weigh more than 25 to 30 pounds. And yes, staff historically have collected them, but we're also trying to do is basically bring us in line with the bylaws that currently stands. There's a lot of provisions that were not enforced in the previous bylaw that now we're trying to bring in line in terms of the enforcement. The other also element is I have to give a big kudos to members of the community because they have been adjusting through the transition period to the new requirements in terms of bin size and also in terms of item limits, to the point where we're tracking basically week to week patterns in terms of how many tags we're actually issuing, and we have our next update coming out next week. But what we're seeing is basically week to week, the numbers are going down to the point now where the last collection cycle that we had, we're talking about bins that are oversized. We're talking about 0.2% of residents. This is basically about 1,500 residents across the city of a collection of over 300,000 that we're doing. So we're dealing with a very small number. We appreciate basically some of the hardship that it may create for them, and we have been working with those residents around other options for them. We're not saying that they can't use the bin to bring it to the curb. What we're asking is on collection day is that they take essentially the bags that are in those large containers, put them at the curb so that our collectors can pick them up and not have to be faced with having to basically lift those heavy containers. So, and this is basically, we've gone through basically 1 full month. We're going to be getting into November, which is that next transition period for that transition. And there is ample opportunity to continue to work with the affected residents before we even get into the kind of the full enforcement cycle, which is going to be in December.
Okay, thank you for that, Alain. Councillor Menard?
Thanks very much, Mayor, and thanks to the staff for working on these motions. I know Councillor Brown shared the motion in advance with myself, and I'm happy to support that motion here today. I think one size certainly doesn't fit all in the city, and this is a good example of gathering some more statistics and data for this particular agricultural lands outcome. I just wanted to ask staff a couple of questions about it for education purposes. So on the procedure for owners of agricultural lands now, what is the procedure for them to dispose of their farm waste currently?
Currently, either pick up, so prior to the implementation of the bylaw, it's basically either pick up at the curb or they can bring it to Trail Road directly. Once the bylaw comes into full force, at that point, their option would be basically that 2-month period of April, May, where they could leave it at the curb, staff would pick it up, or they would still have access also to Trail Road.
Thanks for that. And at what point is agricultural considered industrial waste? You know, before the 3-item limit, what quantity was considered too much for curbside pickup in that case?
Councillor, or Mayor, under the old bylaw, basically we had the 6-item limit that everybody was subject to. I think just like the bin size limit, the challenge was that basically the bylaw was not being enforced, but that was the limit at the time.
And I guess the question is around how, if we have massive quantities of agricultural waste, when is that appropriate for curbside pickup versus a different type of operation industrially? Like I said, I'm happy to support the motion today and looking forward to staff reporting back on these figures and coming back to committee and council, and for the councillor for adjusting the motion along with staff. So thank you for that. On the Kelly motion, I guess the statistics are coming back pretty positively overall for people, you know, changing their well, adhering to what they were already doing or changing a little bit to meet the new limit. The media's been very good about getting the message out, as have staff and councillors. So I think we're in a period for everybody in every ward where there's adjustment happening, but that adjustment's going fairly well. And I know staff sent statistics, I think it was last week, to all councillors, and encourage people to take a look at that. We're doing very, very well as a city in terms of meeting the new policy, and as Mr. Gonsi says, the next statistics that are going to come out, keep an eye out for those because they're even better. So this is one that I think we, you know, let's have the policy implemented. Let's give the time for the policy to take effect, and then come back with a staff report. To Councillor Kelly's point, staff are going to come back on this as well and report back. So we'll see that staff report back, and if there needs to be adjustments, then I think that's the time to make those adjustments, not when we're just rolling out the program. Though I appreciate the comments. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Menard. Councillor Curry?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just have a few comments. First of all, I have spoken to the people in what used to be rural Canada, and their comments to me were that predominantly the garbage they have, and obviously it's not every farm, but a lot of them, it's feed bags and the twine wrap stuff. And so my first question is, first of all, that stuff is very light, and that was the comment made to me, like it doesn't weigh a lot, right? But yet our bylaw talks about how many pounds. But this stuff is just the bags that unfortunately are not recyclable. I have another question on that. But if it is also pounds, then how is it not taken into consideration that what they're putting out is really not heavy in weight?
Mr. Mayor, to the question, so if they can include it as part of their 3-item limit, because here again, even when we're servicing farms, the main focus here is on the residential component. So if they're able to dispose of it at the curb as part of their item limit, then that is not an issue. They can do that. this is when basically they require basically their item limit plus they have unavoidable waste. At that point, it's, yeah, there's a weight issue, but it's more around the quantity, and that will vary depending on the size of the farm. And that's the component there that I think what the additional year will provide us is more time to do more set out studies to really understand what is the composition of that waste, what are the yearly patterns that we're looking at, so that we can come back to council with an update in a year from now.
Okay, because I really think that's an important component of it, just because a lot of it is really light. Like, it's just the bags. It's just the twine. It doesn't weigh a lot. Anyway, that is good to know. I'll be supporting this motion anyways. But the other part of it is, if we are able to put into our green bins bags that are, you know, you want to put your bread that's moldy, it's still in the bag, you can put that in your green bin in the bag, and yet a lot of their waste is bags. Would it not be that this would be recyclable, even though it's made of strange materials, that it still would be similar to some of what we allow in the green bin?
So, Mr. Mayor, the provisions that we made for the green bin was to allow some plastic bags for them to put their organic waste into those bags when they're dumping it into their green bin. And it was to try to remove that yuck factor. It was not intended to be used as an alternate disposal site for plastics or plastic bags. So if it's recyclable materials, if it's recycled plastic, that should be going into the blue box. If it's not, then it becomes waste. And that's where we're trying to make the distinction between what's farm waste that could be unavoidable, and we're talking about the exemption, versus basically what you can put into your normal waste.
Okay, so, but I mean, with this delay, the idea is that you would look into all of these things and take some of this into consideration. You'll have a further analysis of what the waste actually is and if there are other options. Is that what I understand with this delay?
Mr. Mayor, that's correct. The information that we've based on our policy right now was based on the survey that we had undertaken in late 2023 with the farming community. This additional year will provide us additional time to do more set-out studies, engage more with the community, better understand the composition, so that we can understand the impacts of, if we do implement basically that 2-month provision in April, May, how achievable that's going to be for our farming community.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. The second motion, so, you know, our bylaw doesn't talk about what people can bring their garbage down the end of the laneway in, right? So if these are large carts, I understand what you had just said, that instead they can just take their bags out of the large bins, put them on the side of the road. And I mean, as anybody who drives around the rural area, that ends up being quite a mess, right? You've got the crows and the coyotes, everybody else gets in there, and it's a mess because you don't know when the truck is going to come by. Sometimes they come early in the morning, and sometimes they come late in the afternoon, depending on the week, right? So if they did that, carried their garbage down to the road and put it out, it's very likely it would be ripped up by the animals. But they could still keep their bin, and could they not just have the staff on the truck open it up and hand bomb it into the truck? Like, they don't need, I understand that the bin is very heavy, it's actually a cart, as you're saying, but why wouldn't they just open it and hand bomb it as long as it's within the weight, like the actual bag, so that they don't have to risk getting it all opened up by the animals?
So, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate that question. Basically, from a practice perspective, we actually encourage staff not to reach into waste bins to empty them, because we've had staff injured in the past. We don't know what's in those containers. We've had staff basically injured in the past trying to get waste out of a container. So their practice is basically to dump the waste container into the back of the collection vehicle and not start picking away inside the garbage container.
I think, I appreciate that. I think, though, there could be a solution here without, like, I hate to see these bins go into the garbage. I mean, that just defeats so much of our purpose here if they then become waste. These bins that are very helpful for people to get down the laneway with these big wheels and everything else. Anyway, I think there's a solution to this as well, maybe just not in this moment. But anyways, I'll be supporting both motions.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I'll start where Councillor Curry left off, and that is we don't want these oversized bins being thrown out. If homeowners feel there's no utility for these bins, they don't want it collecting as clutter in the garage, we need to think about whether there's even a buyback program or how can we repurpose or reuse these bins. So I'm not looking for an answer today, but I will support staff's direction on the Kelly motion by voting against. But I think that if there are a large quantity of these oversized bins still in use, we've got to think of a way, okay, how can they be repurposed for other purposes? If I could just focus then on Councillor Brown's motion, the agriculture exemption program, appreciating staff's comments at the beginning. I'm just trying to wrap my head around how a waste collector will differentiate between farm waste and household waste, and whether or not that's even a factor at all, where the exemption, I understand, is for farm waste. But is this an issue at all, or is there a differentiation along the curb about what is being put out that's farm waste versus regular household waste?
Mr. Mayor, that will be a challenge for the collectors. Now, that being said, that's why we are going to be undertaking more set-out studies to really understand what is the waste composition. We'll work with the farming community also on that. The other element also that we're, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. So yeah, sorry, I lost the second point I was going to make, but that's one of the reasons why we're going to do set out studies. So is there a risk? Yes, we're dealing with about 1,200 farming properties that have a residential home, so it's still something that we feel that we're able to manage.
But there would not be a limit on how much farm waste is put out on the curb, is that correct?
So, Mr. Mayor, you're correct. The unavoidable component would have no limits. They would still be subject to the 3-item limit for the residential waste component. Okay. And I think that's the piece as we're doing the set-out studies, as inspectors are also looking at some of the waste, that we'll be able to work with the farming community to make sure that those are separate so that they're still abiding by the 3-item limit for the residential waste component.
Yeah, thank you. That goes back to my first question, is if we're still putting a 3-item cap on farming households, and yet there's no cap on the farm waste, how do waste collectors know the difference between the two? But anyway, you'll say that's been worked out, and I appreciate your work with the communities. I appreciate the local councillors' engagement on this matter, and staff are supportive, knowing that over the short term we will get to a better solution, and I'm willing to support the motion today. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it came as a surprise to many of us that one of the issues that constituents raised was the fact that they couldn't use the bins that have the attached lids, and they've had them for many years. As it turns out, and it took me by surprise, is that rule has been in effect since 2011, but no one had tagged them on that before. So instead of being, they're following the three bin limit, but is there any way that we can still continue to let them use the attached lids, or give them some advice on how they can take it off and on? Because that seems to be the sticking point, is the lids rather than the size. And these are bins they've been using for a long time in many cases. And the other concern is that the reason that you want those lids is because of rats and other vermin or pests. So can we have a compromise on that?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, and I believe Councillor Luloff had brought that up also at committee. If the bins themselves are 140 liters or less, all they have to do is basically remove the hinge from the lid so that the operator can actually just remove it. The problem with the lids is it makes it a lot more challenging for the operators when they're dumping it. Often they get hit by the cover. But certainly I would not recommend that they not use their bin. Just often the hinges are easy to remove on it. They just need to remove the hinge so that they can just take the cover off.
Well, right now they've been tagged to, that they can't use it right now. So we need some communication on that. so that so I can advise them, because I've had a number of complaints, and nothing about the 3-bag limit, but several on this topic. If it's possible, it'd be very helpful.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think that what we're seeing right now is the value of having a transition period for the implementation. There are things that we're seeing now that we might not have anticipated initially, or that we're seeing that is a more prominent concern, so that we're able to also adjust both our communication and also how we're engaging with those members of the community that may be facing some of those challenges. So that's, to me, that's the value piece of having our transition period leading up to full enforcement.
So if somebody has one of those containers now, even though they got tagged, if they can find a way to just remove the lid, then it'll be okay?
Absolutely. As long as the lid is removable, okay, we will take it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so I'd like to speak to both motions. To the Brown motion, so thank you very much for putting the motion together. As the son of farmers myself, I can attest to your theory that yes, cattle eats more than just between April 1st and May 31st. I have seen it happen myself, sir, and you are correct. So I definitely support the aim of having a strategy that will meet the unique needs of farmers. I appreciate that. The first question I have is, as I mentioned to you, I saw a similar motion that was coming to Environment Committee, which seemed to be achieving the same purpose. But as I understand from you that there may have been a procedural reason for bringing this similar motion to Council, would you, either yourself or the clerk, speak to that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, after Councillor Brown had introduced his notice of motion at the last Environment Climate Change Committee, I had the opportunity to review and advise that one provision of that motion spoke directly to the solid waste bylaw that would be before Council at this meeting. So this would be the appropriate time to bring the motion forward, and not in a month from now.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I also understand that in this case, what we are expressly doing is we are granting an exception to another one way of looking at it is a home business. You have a residential property and you run a business on your property. I am sure that there are other businesses that run their business from their home that may be seeking other forms of exceptions, perhaps not as much waste as is put forward from a farmer. So I'm not sure, can staff speak to whether or not the granting of this exception, which I agree with and support, might open the door for other home-based industries to seek similar exceptions?
Mr. Mayor, I would suggest in this case no, and the reason for that is the amendment that's being proposed is to an exemption that we were already including as part of the bylaw. I think the nuance here is it's instead of taking in that unavoidable waste during a 2-month period of April and May, it's basically deferring the implementation of that 2-month period to say continue to collect it year-round, do a bit more work to be able to better understand the impacts, and then bring it back next in a year from now.
Thank you. During the 1-year exemption period, and I heard my colleague, Councillor Curry, make reference to the fact that these excess farm-related materials that we will be allowing outside the policy, that they themselves, questions as to why they themselves are not recyclable materials. Knowing that it is our overall interest to encourage greater waste diversion, whether from residential waste or business-related waste, during the year exemption, will we be doing anything to see what can we do to either support or incentivize reduction of that farm-related waste, should that be feasible?
Mr. Mayor, absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why we will continue to engage with the farming community to understand basically the waste that's being generated, and to see are any of them, could they be recycled? Are there different products they could be using? And then understanding what is the true unavoidable waste that they're dealing related to the farmer operation. So yeah, the short answer is yes.
Thank you. Now, I just have a couple questions with regards to the Kelly motion. And bear in mind, I have heard similar concerns of, if I am using this oversized bin, and if I am, sticking within my 420 liters of waste, is that not supportable according to the intentions of the bylaw? But of course, the problem and the concern that we have is the impact that will have on waste on our operators. But I need to reinforce the fact that when this policy was first put in place, we were already at 85% compliance across the entire city, that 85% of people within the city were able to, you know, operate within these limits. And now within just a few short weeks and months of the implementation of this program, if I'm understanding what you're going to say about the rates for next week, we will now be at 99.8% compliance. If next week we are going to be seeing, if you were projecting that only 0.2% of people are outside the limit, we are at 99.8 compliance. No matter how you look at it, if that is correct, this program is succeeding quite well. And so I am very reluctant to put in place any measures that might open the doors for some kind of recidivism on this kind of program. But on the question to what Councillor Kelly is raising, concern from residents about what to do with my big bin. If I understand it, most of these bins are made of recyclable plastic. Do we not have the capacity, or are there not already programs in place, or might there be programs in place to address the recyclability of these bins? There's these bins themselves, we can work towards getting rid of these, can't we?
Mr. Mayor, that's very bin specific. So some of them might be recyclable, some of them may not be. I think definitely what we're encouraging is before people dispose of their large carts, is there could be other uses for them. They could still use them again to cart it to the street. There may be others that want it. I think the Buy Nothing org is a great organization that they may not have a need for it, but if somebody else might, because they are good containers to be able to use for also other purposes. And that's really what we're trying to promote is if it's not a life for them that they want to have, maybe that cart can have a life for somebody else, not as a garbage, but for an alternative purpose.
All right. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Devine. Councillor Brown, Councillor Kelly, did you want to give some wrap-up comments? You're okay? Councillor Kelly?
I would like to, yeah. Actually, I just have a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
What options are currently available for residents at the 140-liter limit?
So, Mr. Mayor, the bylaw speaks to up to 140 liters, and the reason for that provision is to give some leeway for manufacturers. Some of them are at 121 or 126, so it's just to provide that flexibility. The exact 140 liter, I don't think that there's a lot out there. I know there's one manufacturer that's kind of promoting a 140 liter bin. That's the only one that we're aware of right now. But again, our bylaw is up to.
Are they available for purchase right now?
I believe their online site says that they're open for pre-orders with delivery in early December.
Okay. And other than Ottawa Bin Works, are you aware of any other companies that will be offering these types of bins?
At this point, I'm not aware.
Okay. And this was touched on briefly by one of my colleagues, but is there currently any plan or recycling program for the oversized bins that hundreds or thousands of people across the city own?
So there's not necessarily a recycling program per se, but what we are encouraging residents that do have those large carts is to look at an alternate use for it. Again, I appreciate Councillor Curry's concerns about how they bring it to the curb. I think those are things that residents can look at in terms of their options. They may be able to use it for other containers for something else, or put it out on the market. Maybe somebody else would have a use for it. So we will definitely work with residents to communicate that out before they decide to just dispose of their bin.
I have heard concerns from residents about what will happen to those, and I do know that some people already have put them out as a bulky item. So I do know that some of them are finding their way to the landfill, which seems counter to what we wanted to achieve with these changes. I do want to thank you, Alain, for your back and forth over the last 24 hours and trying to make this work. I'm still urging my colleagues to take what I think is a very limited, short-term step to give people a fair chance to adapt to a new policy. So I hope that that people can find a way to support my motion and allow people that grace period and time to adapt to ensure that there are viable options available for people commercially, because right now there is not, and we are asking people to adapt without that option in place. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly, and thank you to both Councillor Brown and Councillor Kelly for bringing these items forward for discussion today. So on the Councillor Brown motion, is that carried?
Carried.
Okay. And I sense that there might be some people voting against the Councillor Kelly motion, so if we could have a recorded vote on that, please.
Councillor Leeper.
Yes.
Councillor Gower.
No.
Councillor King.
No.
Councillor Dudas.
No.
Councillor Kitts.
Yes.
Councillor Kelly.
Yes.
Councillor Bradley.
No.
Councillor Hubley.
Yes.
Councillor Troster.
No.
Councillor Johnson.
No.
Councillor Devine.
No.
Councillor Lulop.
Yes.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor Menard.
No.
Councillor Lowe.
Yes.
Councillor Curry.
Yes.
Councillor Brockington.
No.
Councillor DeRush.
Yes.
Councillor Hill. Councillor Carr.
No.
Councillor Giroux.
Yes.
Councillor Blunt.
Oui.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Councillor Brown.
Yes.
Mayor Sutcliffe.
No.
13 yeas, 11 nays.
Okay, carried. And then on the item as amended, is that carried? Okay, item 15.1, the Omnibus 2 official plan amendment. I know there's a motion regarding the table of amendments, and then Councillor Plante, you have the motion as well. Councillor Leeper, did you want to do your motion first?
Thanks. I won't try to read out the table, but that should be available on the screen or otherwise. Whereas staff have received multiple submissions relating to the proposed amendments in the report following its publication, and whereas staff considered the submissions, I'm glad they did, and whereas staff agreed with the submissions relating to Amendment 9 concerning pedestrian cycling facilities by transecting road type, Amendment 13 concerning the protection of wetlands, 55 concerning the mobility network for the LeBreton Flats district, and whereas staff partially agree with the submissions related to Amendment 6 concerning development within a future neighborhood overlay, and Amendments 45 and 62 concerning protected transportation corridors, and whereas staff do not agree with the submissions relating to Amendment 17 concerning step-back requirements in the suburban transect, and Amendment 27 concerning heights in special districts, and whereas staff have found an administrative error in Amendment 57A concerning the relocation of unbuilt country lot subdivisions, therefore be it resolved that City Council receive and approve the document 4A, staff recommended changes to document 1, Appendix A and B, and document 4B, staff recommended changes to document 1, Schedule Q. Does that one end with the table? Because there's no, doesn't have the further notice. No worries. Leave it there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Plante.
Whereas staff report ACS 2024 PDB PS 0087 Omnibus 2 official plan amendment includes a new area-specific policy to limit the number of emergency shelters permitted in Ward 12 to 4. And whereas Planning and Housing Committee referred this provision to Council for consideration pursuant to subsection 83.8A of the procedure bylaw, and whereas subsection to 83.8B of the procedure bylaw provides that where a matter is before Council pursuant to subsection 8, a motion shall be required to put the matter to Council for approval. Therefore, be it resolved that Council approve the proposed amendment 56 to Volume 2C, new area-specific policy, page 28 of Document 1, Appendix A, as outlined in the original staff report. Merci.
Okay, did you want to speak to that? And so, well, as you introduce it, if you like, yeah, or it's up to you, I guess.
Can I have the PowerPoint on the screen, please? Okay, next slide. So there's been a lot of questions. I've spent a lot of time with staff. I even myself did a lot of reflection about this over the last couple weeks. I know people feel a specific way about this policy. I know this policy's been in place for a long time. It was put in place by my predecessor and his predecessor. And as you know, obviously the councillor for Ward 12, I'm always looking for ways to improve the outcome for all residents in my ward, whether they're housed or unhoused. But if I'm being really straightforward, there's a lot of distrust in the community about the new official plan on this issue. Just to give you an example, I believe it was about a year and a half ago, Councillor Lowe asked the general manager of social services at the time, you know, when is Bernard-Gramé, which is our physical distancing center, going to reopen? And we were told it would be open in August 2023. Well, it's now almost November 2024, and it's still being used as a physical distancing center and has been since 2020. So, and last week we got a really great quote from Councillor Luloff, which I will paraphrase. He said, "This is why we are having a ward-specific summit, to avoid people trying to make decisions on issues they are unfamiliar with, at intersections they've never been to, in areas they don't represent, that don't take into account the human context." And I'm going to ask that you keep that in mind as I continue my presentation. Next slide. So I understand a lot of people have supportive housing, they have transitional housing in their wards. I want to make it very clear that the Ward 12 cap is very specifically on emergency shelters. That means people come in the evening, they line up, they have a place to sleep for the evening, and they have to leave in the morning. It does not talk about, you know, the hotels. It's not referring to people who live in supportive housing or transitional housing. It's very specific to the idea of emergency shelters. I understand that can be confusing, but in French, the word is very specific. It's une refuge, and that's what we're talking about here. So my understanding, though, about the Ward 12 cap is that we've never been sued over this. It's never gone to judicial review. We do have limits on things like payday loans. We have voted on that in the past here at the city. And we also reversely don't have a specific policy at the city which says, for example, in this one neighborhood, we have a lot of keen people who like to swim, so we're going to put lots of swimming pools in this area. And I want to say, too, the province has also recently announced guardrails around things like injection sites. There's now a 200-meter limit on them. So we do have a history of, here at the city, here at the province, putting things in place to protect the residents for whatever reason. They're always very specific to that policy. Next slide. And I hear a lot, often from people who advocate for these services, that they need to be co-located. They need to be around each other. And there's a lot of movement right now in other cities to reverse that trend. So recently, the 3 mayors around the Durham area were interviewed in the Globe and Mail, and they very specifically said one of the mistakes was putting most of the services for vulnerable people in one place on a strip of downtown Oshawa. That drew predators and worsened disorder on the streets, angering the residents and the business owners. Next slide. Montreal also has a very specific policy around shelters and services for the vulnerable. They do spread them out throughout the city because they also, too, avoid concentration, and this is always taken into account when they are approving new services. Next slide. Sorry. So this is a quick map of Ward 12. Shout out to Ward 12, best ward in the city. And the pentagons, I had to look that up, I forgot my math terms, represent our emergency shelters. We have 4. So we have Mission, Salvation Army, Shepherds of Good Hope, and we have a women's shelter, which we don't disclose the address of. And taking off the cap for Ward 12 means that Salvation Army, for those of you who are around for the arguments last term of council, can now have their 2 locations. They can have their Byward Market location, and they can have now a location on Montreal Road. I have heard that, you know, Salvation Army is looking to sell. They're going to sell this location. I have asked them to confirm this. They have not confirmed that they will actually sell this location. And there's no, generally in the neighborhood, there is a tendency to leave units vacant instead of selling them. So the University of Ottawa has about 28 vacant homes or places that they've purchased in the Sandy Hill neighborhood. They are not selling them, even though they have about a $40 million deficit, because they want to keep these properties. Smart Living, same thing. Since the international student cap was taken off, they have about 8 extra units that are sitting empty. They are not selling them either. So I would say that that is very premature to suggest that they're going to sell it to fund this or fund that. It's not consistent with the
Councillor, you're
tendency in the area.
You're at time, so if you just want to quickly wrap up in 10 seconds or so, that'd be great.
Next slide. So this is what we have in front of our shelf. This is just the one on George Street. This is what I'm trying to have more of in my ward. Now, for those of you who want to say it's, use a compassionate argument, there is no compassion in kicking people out at 7 a.m. There is no compassion in making people queue up at 9 p.m. and sleep in a plastic chair. It's not compassionate. So I'm asking you to support this. I understand it's been talked about and rummaged about for the last couple of weeks. Okay. I'm happy to answer questions. Merci.
Merci, Conseillère Plante. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks. I do want to make sure that Councillor Plante has an opportunity to fully explain her rationale. So I will ask you, Stephanie, the 2-week delay, it's a 2-week delay with your motion?
No.
Sorry?
The motion would reinstate the, the motion would reinstate the shelter cap.
Yeah, so...
Actually, Councillor Leeper, if you don't mind,
that's fine.
If you don't mind, I'll come back to you in a second, but just, I think it would be helpful to have the city clerk explain, because there was some confusion among councillors around exactly what's happening here in terms of how it came from committee, what was included, what isn't, what happens if we approve the motion, what happens if we don't approve the motion. So perhaps you could explain.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As members may be aware, at Planning and Housing Committee earlier this month, the committee approved a motion that referred the provision with respect to the shelter cap, which was part of the original staff report. That was referred to council without a committee recommendation. So as a result, a motion is required to put that provision forward for approval. That is the motion that Councillor Plante has moved. If that carries, it will be included in the item as amended. If that motion does not pass, the shelter cap would not be included in the item as amended.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. That's clear, so I don't need to ask Councillor Plante anything else. But I will ask staff. Staff, I understand, do not support the shelter cap. Can I just ask them to take us through that rationale?
So, Mr. Mayor, as part of the new official plan adopted by council and approved by the province, the official plan at a high level states that there would be no separation distances or caps for shelters in the official plan. And that is really to promote equity in the provision of housing throughout the municipality, as opposed to a limitation within one area, so that folks have access to those services and shelter when needed.
Thank you, Royce. I will just say I have been asking for the last couple of years. I'm engaged in a very active discussion right now around things like temporary shelter space, group homes, supportive housing, which raise concerns and fears with residents nearby. And my approach has been consistent to let residents know up front that I am not opposing that we are in a crisis, that we are in an emergency, and addressing that emergency is the first priority. So I will be voting against implementing shelter cap as part of the omnibus because I need to be consistent in what my priorities are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as a representative of an outer urban ward, there are pieces of the new official plan that are giving my residents pause as well, namely the allowance for rooming houses to be now put in places that they were never considered before. We have a couple rooming houses in a residential neighborhood that cause a tremendous amount of service calls, and that is a challenge for those neighboring residents. But I do believe that that policy and its expansion could allow for better regulation, a more cohesive relationship between building code, bylaw, and housing services to be able to provide deeply affordable housing in places that are not the downtown core. We've had these questions come to council before in a few different iterations, whether that be through the HAF, whether that be through Sprung Shelter. My suggestion might be that we actually are really well placed as politicians to review policy that allows for housing with dignity everywhere, but we don't necessarily benefit by making it political in its decisions. We do have to represent our residents when it comes to the reports and those things coming forward, but in a crisis, I think that this official plan with greater density and different housing types in different communities will allow for a lot more opportunity. The relationship between supporting the poverty reduction strategy is not lost on me in the same meeting. The root causes of people needing additional supports are chronically underfunded. The drug supply is toxic. Mental health is not being looked at. And if we really need to help all of our residents, we need to be investing there. And the housing type or the content of the housing type is not a function of zoning. So it is a challenging conversation as politicians to have, but it does take all of us to do our part. I know that our residents are going to be asking the same questions of the official plan and the comprehensive zoning bylaw review, and I'll be prepared to carry those difficult conversations forward for housing as a human right across the city. So I won't be supporting the motion today. I don't think it's appropriate for us to interfere in what the inside of a building is on a zoning conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much. I just have a few questions for staff. I'm wondering if we could take another look at, could someone explain to me how emergency shelter is defined in the proposed cap from staff's perspective? What are the words that are used to describe it?
So, Mr. Mayor, the definition would be provided in the zoning bylaw, and it was actually in Councillor Plon's presentation, but I'll read it out for council. Shelter means an establishment providing temporary accommodation to individuals who are in immediate need of emergency accommodation and food, and may include ancillary healthcare, counseling, and social support services.
Okay, so thank you very much. From my perspective, there is nothing in those words that would prevent this cap from also applying to many other kinds of shelters, including women's shelters, transitional housing. They are all emergency shelters. They all provide food and ancillary services. So I understand the intent of this motion, but my objection is twofold. One is I think the language doesn't do what it purports to do. And also I think, just as Councillor Johnson and Councillor Leeper said, I think it opens the door to the politicization of emergency response. And I find that deeply concerning because I think as councillors, sometimes we need to push back sometimes against some of the instincts of our residents when those instincts are guided by fear, and when those instincts are afraid of change, and when those instincts are afraid of the aesthetics of poverty. But I also understand there is a very specific challenge in Ward 12. My question to staff, probably to you, Clara, is there anything stopping us from working with the emergency men's shelters that are currently in the Byward Market to encourage them not to kick people out for 8 hours a day? Because I do agree, we're seeing the blowback effect of this in Centertown, this process of essentially having people wander the city with nowhere to go for 8 hours a day is leading to a lot of knockoff challenges, specifically in the downtown core. Is there any reason why this isn't something we can't explore with them in the future?
Mr. Mayor, there are operational, excuse me, there are operational challenges, obviously, where the shelters must close in order to clean, for example, and prepare for the meal times that occur. However, as part of our 10-year plan refresh, as part of the needs assessment work that we'll be undertaking, we will have that conversation with them. We can take that away.
Okay, I appreciate that. Would staff take that as a direction to, I would have to write it up, but would it be friendly if it was a direction to explore the feasibility of reducing the amount of time that residents in emergency shelters must vacate the room that they are staying in?
Mr. Mayor, it would not be unfriendly. I do want to caution that it could have a financial impact. So I would rather respectfully that you allow us to have that conversation as part of a broader set of activities that we're going to take with them.
Okay, that's fine. So I'll just put it on the public record that that's something that I support. I also represent a ward with a high concentration of social services, and I understand that that can be very frustrating, and that we do want to embed services in every community across the city so people don't have to come downtown. If they don't want to, they don't need to leave their community. But again, I have files that come to Planning and Housing Committee where I don't like what's going in the building, but at the end of the day, we're voting on the zoning. And I think that's what it comes to here. As frustrating as it is, we can't vote on what goes inside the building. We can, in the context of our zoning bylaw, we're voting on the rules that govern the construction of those buildings. So that's why I can't support this cap, even though I'm enormously sympathetic to the challenges in Ward 12. And I hope we can continue this conversation with staff about how we can change some of those shelter standards for the dignity of the people who stay there and for the surrounding communities that are impacted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Councillor Carr?
Yeah, thanks very much. I don't even know if it's worth me speaking. Councillor Troster really echoed what I wanted to say. I am very sympathetic to Councillor Plant with the shelters. I do think that we need to look at our shelter standards. When I look at, over the last year, I've had 2 shelters until recently. I have one now where they were a lower acuity population. Many people, of course, as the asylum seekers, they work, they volunteer, they go to school. They're simply in a shelter because of their status as an asylum seeker and that they don't have the documentation in order to get housing, and we do not have enough transitional housing sites. But the ability to have those services, security, everything in that building, and of course I work in Heron Road Community Centre, makes a tremendous difference. There are no people wandering around. There are no people actively going out and seeking services in this model. And I think it's worked really well. And I know, I guess this is a question to Clara. You've said that there could be financial implications to looking at the fact whether this could be something adopted to the emergency shelters. Is there any review on the books that will be looking at how we operate shelters? Is there anything where we'd be looking at a cap for shelters? Is there nothing planned as part of the 10-year housing and homelessness plan that would look at these elements?
Mr. Mayor, currently we do not have a shelter review on our work plan. We do have a 10-year plan, housing and homelessness plan refresh, and part of that refresh will include an extensive amount of engagement and discussion with the sector, including the shelter sector and the public. And through those discussions, we anticipate that this very issue will come up. So we'll take away the question on whether or not we can have a discussion with them regarding shelter standards. However, we would suggest that this would be part of our 10-year plan refresh activity.
Okay, thanks very much. We'll add that I certainly appreciate, I'm not hearing a lot of colleagues that will be supporting a shelter cap because, of course, the zoning, the new official plan, doesn't allow for those sort of things. So I would encourage all my colleagues around the table that when they're told that they might have a facility in their neighborhood, they remember what the official plan says, that they remember that we, as a human right, everybody has a place to live. And I would encourage everyone to remember that when they're faced with applications in their own neighborhood. Thank you very much. I won't be supporting the cap.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Plante, did you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I'll just wrap up. I just wanted to sort of answer a couple of the comments that were made. So we do have on the books already policies and laws around distances for things that the municipality and the province has already deemed to require one. So it's not uncommon for these things to be legislated. Second of all, I can appreciate your comments, Councillor Lieber, and I do appreciate that you are welcoming of any new services coming into Kitchissippi, but you have the privilege of not having those in the first place. We do not. We have these legacy organizations that have been there for a long time. As you can probably ascertain, there's no real push to have them modernize or go to a new model. And while I wish we could sort of have that sort of same enthusiasm in my ward for new services, I don't know what else I can do to sort of tell the residents, like, yep, we have this cap in place, there won't be any more, because the history has shown us that they're there to stay and they're not going anywhere. And I'm also going to push back on the idea that everyone, you know, that they're commenting on the shelters as in it's a place to live. It's not a place to live. It's a place you stay overnight, and it's a place you have to leave in the morning. It's literally a lily pad on your way to sort of having to go in the morning and having to find a day program or going to the Rideau Center or doing something else. I personally don't think that's a dignified way of living, and I hope, as Clara mentioned, we can get to a new model, but I'm not sure how else I can put guardrails around these in my community unless we have the cap. Last, I do want to touch upon the, you know, and Councillor Carr talked a bit about the politicization, or sorry, I think it was Councillor Troster who talked about the politicization. The politicization is already here. You know, I have been mentioned in a webinar that took place on Friday. This has been mentioned in the House of Commons. It's, you know, there's people who are really, really worked up about this issue. And I don't know what else I can tell the residents of Ward 12, housed and unhoused, that we are working on something else without saying that what you're experiencing right now, we're going to stop the bleeding and we're going to move to a new model. If you guys have any suggestions, I'm open to hearing them, but you know, we are very keen on housing solutions. I sent out an email 2 weeks ago talking about some of the other organizations geared towards LGBTQ, women fleeing violence, kids coming out of foster care. We love having those in the community. We have a lot of them. I believe at last count we have 34, and we want more of them. We just want to stop the shelter model that has been in place for a long time and make sure that we can transition to something better. Yeah, I think that's all. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, merci, Councillor Plante. So we'll vote first on Councillor Leeper's motion. Is that carried? Okay, and then a recorded vote on Councillor Plante's motion. S'il vous plaît.
Councillor Leeper.
No.
Councillor Gower.
No.
Councillor King.
No.
Councillor Dudas.
No.
Councillor Kitts.
No.
Councillor Kelly.
No.
Councillor Bradley.
No.
Councillor Hubley.
No.
Councillor Troster.
No.
Councillor Johnson.
No.
Councillor Devine.
Yes.
Councillor Luloff.
No.
Councillor Tiernan.
No.
Councillor Menard.
No.
Councillor Lowe.
No.
Councillor Curry.
No.
Councillor Brockington.
No.
Councillor DeRush.
No.
Councillor Hill.
No.
Councillor Carr.
No. No.
Councillor DeRuse.
No.
Councillor Plante.
Oui.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
No.
Councillor Brown.
No.
Mayor Sutcliffe.
No.
23 nays, 2 yeas.
Okay, thank you. And then the item as amended, is that carried? Okay, moving to item 19 on the agenda. There are no in-camera items. Motion to adopt reports. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That the Build Heritage Committee Report 18A, Community Services Committee Report 12, Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee Report 14, the Environment and Climate Change Committee Report 13, Planning and Housing Committee Reports 35A and 36, Transportation Committee Report 15, and the reports for the City Clerk entitled Status Update, Council Inquiries and Motions for the period ending October 25th, 24, and a summary of oral and written public submissions for items subject to the Planning Act, explanation requirements at the City Council meeting of October 16, 2024 be received and adopted as amended.
Carried? Thank you. Motions of which notice has previously been given. Vulnerable Social Infrastructure Bylaw. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. So the motion I had introduced it last time, if everybody's okay with it, I'll just go right to the therefore be it resolved. Therefore, be it resolved that council directs staff to consider the feasibility of implementing a vulnerable social infrastructure bylaw similar to Vaughan's, as well as alternative temporary or permanent approaches to address the prevention of harassment and hate speech in connection to special events or demonstrations as part of the ongoing concurrent reviews of special events on city streets bylaw and the special events on private and public property bylaw, including consulting with the Ottawa Police Service on operational feasibility as part of that review. And 2, report on findings as part of the staff report on the review of special events bylaw in Q1 2025. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hubley. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much, Mayor. We're all wearing our poppies this morning. I'm reading a book right now by Tim Cook, who many of you will know as the chief military historian at the War Museum. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of it. It's a history of the Royal Canadian Army Medical Corps, and I'm almost done the book, and he's just described the medical consequences, the human consequences of the last 100 Days campaign leading up to November 11th, 1918, and it was horrific. It was far more horrific than I ever would have thought, and those soldiers were fighting and dying and being smashed apart for the democratic freedoms that we hold very, very dear today. I'm speaking today because I'm going to vote in favor of moving ahead with a feasibility study. But I want staff to know how deeply, deeply uncomfortable I am with the notion that we might curtail the right to protest. I just don't know today. I have in past supported vocally the bubble zones for healthcare facilities dealing with women's reproductive control of their bodies. Nothing is ever black and white, but I want staff to know that my vote in favor of proceeding with study is because I am uncertain, and it is not a vote to say, come back to us with a recommendation for a bubble bylaw. Let me know what the consequences of that would be, because I think every time we curtail democratic freedoms, we start to step on the turf of those generations of soldiers who have died for those freedoms. That's very much on my mind this morning as I look around at the poppies on our lapels. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Troster.
Thank you, Mayor. It is rare that thinking about how I'm going to vote on a motion keeps me up at night. But this one did. I was tossing and turning last night, and I want to tell you why. I want to take you back to June 2023, where I stood arm in arm with Councillor Kavanagh, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Leeper, and members of my community to physically protect children at Broadview Public School from anti-trans hate. It was one of the most frightening days of my life. There were white guys marching in red hats, in paramilitary formations, targeting children in schools. And that was not the first time I had to protect queer kids with my body. I had done it several times that year at Drag Story Time, and I gotta tell you, we're getting physically tired of physically defending our own community. And that day I went home and I thought, can we do something else? Because it is unfair for citizens to have to enforce this bubble ourselves. But at that point, I did reach out to the community, and the opinion was mixed. So when staff came to my office to talk about the upcoming bylaw review, I said, let's do a scan of what other cities are doing. There is an anti-harassment bylaw in Calgary, for example. I said, tread cautiously, but let's look at this. Because I do think it warrants a conversation. I'm also Jewish. I know what it's like to go to high holiday services surrounded by security. My own mother and my own family is extremely traumatized by the uptick in anti-Semitism right now. It is not a joke. It is serious. People are scared. But I'm also a kid that grew up on picket lines. I worked in the labor movement, and the majority of the protests that achieved the rights that I have to marry my wife, to have healthcare access, to have both of us parent our daughter. They started when someone threw that first brick at Stonewall. And during the HIV/AIDS era, there was a very famous ACT UP protest that happened in a Roman Catholic church. It was a die-in, which raised awareness of the ways that the church was complicit in covering up the HIV/AIDS epidemic. So I'm here to say this is not black and white. Even here at City Hall, there's a daycare at City Hall. That's vulnerable infrastructure. There's a daycare on Parliament Hill called Children on the Hill. The majority of the protests occur here in Centertown, where all of our institutions are very close to each other. So attempting to enforce a barrier, a physical barrier of this nature would be very, very difficult. So I think that this is a conversation worth having, and I am also very conflicted. And I can hear the struggle between the news article that my mother sent me this morning and my friends who have been out there on the street for the last year because their loved ones have been killed in Gaza. This is a really difficult time, but protest is meant to incite. It's meant to disrupt. And when people do that, it's because they're desperate. It's because they have lost loved ones. It's because they don't know how else to change a policy other than to make noise. So I hope staff will take this seriously. I'm excited for this conversation. It's going to be a tough one. I want to hear from constitutional lawyers. I want to hear from the labor movement. I want to hear from the people who are out protesting there every week. I want to hear from the Jewish community. I want to hear from the 2S LGBTQ community. I think this is an issue that we can't ignore. I have serious concerns about the Vaughan bylaw, which, by the way, did you know it imposes a $100,000 fine? Like, is this something we seriously want to consider, right? And it hasn't been tested in court yet. I don't know if anyone has been charged with it, but I got to tell you, we don't know about its constitutionality until it goes to court for real. So again, my opinion is very similar to Councillor Leeper. My vote in favor of this motion is not because I necessarily think we need a bubble bylaw, but it's because I think we need to talk about it. And I'm also aware that it was an entire generation of pro-choice women who fought for the bubble bylaw that protects the Morgentaler Clinic. And it was my predecessor, Catherine McKenney, who worked on this with Yasser Naqvi when he was MPP at the time. So my message to my residents who are concerned about this, I want you to know that my vote today is simply to continue the conversation because I think it's really important. But it is a sobering one, and it's one I'm very concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I have significant concerns about this motion, and I was surprised that it was being raised here at the municipal order of government in the capital of our country, where advocacy, protest, and civil dissent are most welcomed and encouraged as a form of free speech in challenging policy or proposed legislation. That's a time-honored tradition of respect for freedoms that have been hard fought for, like freedom of assembly. And there's a real risk that if we allow this to fully expand, the civic spaces that everybody in Canada can use to speak up and freely dissent and express ideas will slowly shrink. The questions you have to ask yourself is protesting religious authorities or residential schools or long-standing abuses now a non-starter within 100 meters? What about students protesting their school administration? What about protesting private long-term care facility owners whose negligence may have cost the lives of our elders? What about the rights of workers to advocate for new workplace rights, which somehow we say will be okay? Well, I don't like the idea of the municipality being an arbiter on this, nor do I like the implication that a zone would be created that completely insulates a meeting place, let's say a so-called vulnerable social infrastructure meeting place hosting a non-religious event for the sale of weapons of war, from any exposure to protest. And Mayor, this is a motion that doesn't just ask for investigation, it promotes and advocates for a bubble bylaw being implemented. Read the motion. The motion requests the feasibility of, and I quote, implementation of a bubble bylaw similar to Vaughan's, where there is a $100,000 fine that hasn't been challenged and resolved in court, and where the municipality has de facto become the arbiter of what restricts people's rights to free expression, association, and assembly, which is fundamental to who we are as Canadians. There's a reason why so few cities have this on their books. It's rightly considered an infringement on rights. Authorities already have the tools to deal with this. And indeed, our own authorities have been working on this without this motion. There are laws on our books against intimidation, inciting or promoting hatred, threats of violence, harassment, and other abuses the motion talks about. In some recent protests, offenders have been charged. There are also laws that protect healthcare workers from intimidation, which is fundamentally different than what we're talking about here. My view is this proposed bylaw would be an expensive and ineffective move. It would do little to solve the so-called problem. No government, let alone municipal government, should want to put itself in a position to be the arbiter of which protests are acceptable, where, and which are not. If there are acts of protest or civil disobedience we agree with, there are better ways to deal with them and confront them than considering how the state can criminalize them and fine them. That should always be a last resort. I'll be a dissenting vote on this item today, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Menard. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. So I agree with any and all of my colleagues that no one should object to the principle of keeping people safe in their homes and their neighborhoods. And I agree that we need the proper tools in place to ensure public safety. I just do not feel confident that what we are proposing to study here is the right tool. I have many concerns with this bylaw. The main concern I have with it is that we are proposing to emulate to emulate is that existing laws and bylaws already exist that prohibit things like excessive noise in residential areas without a permit, or harassment of private citizens, or trespassing on private property, or assault. The criminal code protects against speech that could incite hatred. We have laws and bylaws on the books already that, if they were properly enforced, protect against violating the peace and ensure public safety. But the bylaw that we are proposing to study here, and make no mistake, there are not cities that have such a bylaw. There is one city, Vaughan. But the bylaw that we are proposing to study would make it illegal to protest outside certain sorts of buildings or areas where most of the activities that would be objectionable under Vaughan's bylaw are already illegal. But the broad restrictions that would come into play with this kind of bubble bylaw pose a potential threat to freedom of expression and freedom of association, because it could gather perfectly legal activities like holding a sign or a silent vigil under the broad brush of a new bylaw by making any potentially objectionable activity illegal. And as has been raised, if we were to follow the Vaughan model, that potentially illegal activity would carry a maximum fine of $100,000. I would be very concerned about using the threat of such severe economic penalties as a means of intimidation itself to disincentivize what could be perfectly legal and legitimate acts of protest. And as has been mentioned, the Vaughan bylaw that we are seeking to emulate has only been in effect since July 2024. So we are looking to follow down the path of precedent that not only raises concerns about restricting freedoms, but has not even been properly tested. This is not the model that I feel that we should be rushing towards. And so for these reasons and others, I will not be supporting the motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, colleagues, for those who have spoken so far. I like Councillor Troster, have been struggling with this. I've heard literally people publicly speak representing various organizations in favor and opposed, and they could come from the same community, and you have leaders within the same community taking opposing stands, so it's very difficult. I do want to, before I make some statements, I want to ask staff for some clarity. We are going to get a report separate from the actual revised bylaws that talks about the feasibility. Is that correct?
So, Mr. Mayor, as we're looking at both bylaws, the one on private property and city streets, yes, there will be two separate reports. This will be basically a review, and we'll bring that back to council.
But are we going to get a report on the feasibility of creating bubble zones before you present us the revised bylaws, or is this all going to happen at the same
Mr. Mayor, I would suggest that probably at the same time, given the timelines that we're working under right now, to bring the bylaws forward.
Yeah, I think there'd be benefit having the report first so we can absorb what your analysis covers, and then you know, we consult, and then we deal with the bylaws. If it happens all at once, it's going to be a lot to absorb. Part 1 of the motion talks about including consulting with the Ottawa Police Service on the feasibility. I'd love your report to go into great detail what input the police provide you, but also what are they doing now? What are the police doing now? What are the police's role when we have ongoing protests? To compliment Councillor Devine, if there's criminal hate going on in this city, enforce the criminal code. We're not going to create a bylaw. We're going to send a bylaw officer to do this. If there's criminal harassment, enforce the criminal code. If there's criminal intimidation, enforce the criminal code. If there's property crimes or any other crimes, we're not going to solve this through an Ottawa bylaw. Enforce the criminal code. That's why we have police. So where are they on this issue? I asked to have the police here. It wasn't my right to ask them to be here today, but I think they could certainly complement the discussion that we're having. I think when the police are informed that protests are going to happen, it's their role to assess in advance public safety. I've been in Toronto. I'm there once a month, and around the American consulate, there's a bubble zone that's created, not through a bylaw. Police assess there's going to be upcoming protests. Still, everyone has the right to protest, but we're going to create sort of a safe area around people who, as Councillor Leeper talked about, we share Civic Hospital. There's the lone anti-abortion protester there that walks up and down the sidewalk, but when they have a large number of people that come, they're pushed back. They're not allowed on the property. Police make that call. So did I support a 3-week occupation in this city? Absolutely not. Did I support their right to protest? Absolutely I did. What we didn't have during that occupation were rules of engagement. There was no enforcement. It was a lawless occupation with no leadership. That's which allowed them to have significant impact. But if that was a protest, they didn't like vaccination campaigns, they didn't like the stance of the federal government, okay, it's your right as a Canadian citizen to come and say that. But it was the 3-week occupation that I was adamantly opposed to. So I have serious reservations with this. I think the police already have the tools to enforce bubble zones when they believe that public safety is at risk and where the location that's going to be protests needs a greater perimeter. I believe they have that authority. So I question the utility of a bylaw being created and then enforced by a bylaw officer. So I have significant concerns in that regard, notwithstanding that we've seen protests recently and historically where a bubble zone, whether it's schools or hospitals, absolutely needed to come into play. So I understand what the mover and seconder are trying to get at here. Obviously, if this passes today, I'll be very, very interested in what's produced in the staff report, but I have some serious reservations with the motion that's before us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Bradley.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just have a couple questions and then just some short remarks, as most has been covered. So it's quite a short time for this feasibility study. I think the recommendation says that it comes back in Q1 of 2025 as part of the special events bylaw. And Councillor Brockington touched on this, but just for further clarity, is the intention to bring back a recommendation of how we could implement some type of bubble bylaw in Ottawa as part of the special events bylaw, or will it just be information about if it's possible to do in Ottawa?
Mr. Mayor, I don't want to presuppose what the outcome is going to be. At this point, what we're being directed to do is to do the feasibility study, and we would be reporting back on that feasibility study.
Right, but you'll be reporting back as part of the special events bylaw, which we're studying, many different parts of that bylaw, which will include recommendations on how we move forward with a revised bylaw. Will this form part of the recommendations, or will it be a separate addendum to the report as in a feasibility study?
Mr. Mayor, as awarded, it would be basically part of our report that would be coming back. We probably would frame it as a separate section of the report for clarity.
So we would not be asked, like there'd be no recommendations to move forward with the bubble bylaw as part of the staff recommendations. That would be a council decision to add it as a recommendation?
I don't think it's possible to answer some of these questions because they're hypothetical and it's too early in the process to know what would happen.
Well, I don't think it's hypothetical, because a feasibility study would be asking for information on what this might look like, versus we go out, we ask staff to, look at this, and then they come back with recommendations of how we can implement it. Are we asking for information, or are we asking for a recommendation on how we could implement something like this? I guess maybe that's to the mover as to clarity as to your intention.
Councillor Hubley, did you want to speak to that? The intent of the motion, as I understand it, and Councillor Hubley, you can speak to this as well, is to have staff explore the feasibility of a bylaw of this nature, look at the other examples, and come back with information about how feasible it would be to do something or not.
That's right, Mr. Mayor, and that's, if we wanted the exact same bylaw as Vaughan, we would have taken it word for word. That's not the intent of including that in there. It's to give staff an example. There's another bubble bylaw in Montreal, is my understanding. There's also some legislation in Calgary that's not quite a bubble bylaw, but I think goes probably even further than what we're talking about here today. But the intent of the motion is to get us facts so that we can make an evidence-based decision on, do we want to go ahead with a bubble bylaw or do we not? I fully recognize all the concerns that are put forward here today, Mr. Mayor, as I'm sure you do too, and share many of those concerns. We don't want to overreach. There is no, we're clear in the wording here that we're not trying to interfere with labor protests or anything like that. We tried to highlight it. It'd be a pretty long list if we listed every single thing. What we're hoping is that staff will go away, take a look at it, come back, give us some information, and let us all decide on where we want to go. Maybe it won't be unanimous, maybe it will be. But our priority, when you and I and Councillor Hill talked about this, was to try to protect the people that right now don't feel protected. And we put in that motion to consult with the police, because as Councillor Brockington mentioned, there's some laws on the books today that could probably help in this case, but they're not being used. And so why aren't they being used? And would a bylaw help take away whatever the concerns are that the police are having when it comes to trying to go to a place of worship or a long-term care facility or any of the other examples we have here? So it's really fact-finding, Mr. Mayor. There's no pre-conclusion that, okay, give us the exact wording of Vaughan and we'll vote for it. I agree, $100,000 fine is too excessive. I'll say that right up front. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hubley. Councillor Plant? Sorry.
Wasn't quite done.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. This is another question for staff. So Councillor Troster had mentioned in her comments a number of different community partners, including the legal community, different organizations, vulnerable residents, obviously Ottawa Police, unions and labor groups should all be consulted as part of this feasibility study. And I'm just wondering if staff could elaborate on how they intend to consult with these groups and if they'll be sharing the list of organizations and community groups that they consulted with as part of the process.
Mr. Mayor, I'll ask Valerie to come to the table to answer that question.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. As part of the feasibility study, we would seek to provide Council with as fulsome information as possible on whether a bubble bylaw similar to Vaughan's or looking at other examples is feasible in Ottawa, the considerations around that, both legal and operational, and also seek to advise Council on the work it would take to develop such a bylaw. I can't say for sure that there will be time to consult with all of the groups that the councillor just noted. We are already working with some of those groups as part of the special event bylaw reviews. So we would, for example, continue our work with the Ottawa Police Service on this issue. But I think it is a cautious approach on this is necessary in terms of the scope of consultations that we would be able to do on this issue prior to Q1 of next year.
Thank you very much for that. You know, I share a lot of reservations that many of my colleagues have already expressed. So ultimately, I don't think I'm going to be supporting it. And I think it's primarily the light language in the motion. I don't think it provides staff the flexibility to look at other options to ensure the safety of vulnerable residents, because it specifically says consider the feasibility of implementing a bubble bylaw. And that's just a policy direction that I don't want to see advanced. So I won't be supporting this motion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Councillor Plante.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Valérie. J'avais juste deux questions.
Thank you, Valérie. I had two questions coming from my community. First, some people were wondering if it would be possible also to have bubble zones around schools, daycare center, against the consumption of hard drugs. Okay, so that's my only question. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No. This review would not include that. It's important, but that's not what we're asked to do in this motion. So could I have a study specifically on this issue then, Mr. Mayor? In that case, you'd have to put that on our work plan for the review. As you know, this issue is not part of the plan right now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to a couple of comments. First of all, I'll be supporting this. Second of all, some of the comments about what police powers we already have. I mean, you don't have police here in the room, but you have 3 members of your police services board, and I can assure you we've asked questions when there have been protests in the past and police haven't seemed to be acting, where people have asked that question, why didn't police do anything? And I would just like to share with you one of the responses we've received from police is because police have to do a risk assessment in every situation and ask themselves, is it worth us actually taking more action here right now, or would it in fact cause further danger to the people involved in the protests or the counter protests or nearby residents? So I think when we go down the road of getting a feasibility study here and we get this information, police are being consulted, you'll get more of those types of answers. Why have police not acted in some cases, even if they have the power? Well, there are good reasons. But I would say, if you just have to think about a scenario, imagine a protest in front of a school, an elementary school, and you've got kids, senior kindergarten, junior kindergarten, out in the kindergarten yard, and the protest is taking place. Police, for certain, are not going to maybe instigate by starting to arrest people. You have to take into consideration what's there. So maybe it's safer to just not have that type of protest taking place in those areas. So, but this is information we'll find out, right? And I think that police will have a lot of information to share. I am actually really glad we're having this conversation because that information will come out. And councillors who are looking at the reasons why police maybe haven't exercised the powers they have might understand better why the police services budget is what it is and what our situation currently is in this city right now for staffing. So I fully support us going down the road of feasibility, and I honestly can't understand why anybody wouldn't, because this is just an opportunity to get more information on this issue.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much, and thank you to those that spoke before me. I think a lot of people have spoken about some of their concerns, and particularly appreciated hearing Councillor Troster speak. Yes, one of my concerns is that this has come to council and not committee. I would have felt that, something that has brought up this much discussion should have perhaps come to committee level, where we could have had the opportunity to hear from delegations directly. And so my question is, I understand from the responses from bylaw, there'll be consultations, but we're not going to have a full engage Ottawa process on this, are we? As we do when we review other bylaws? Can that just be clarified?
Mr. Mayor, it is unlikely that we will be able to design and execute a full consultation plan on the feasibility of developing a bubble bylaw in Ottawa for February. We are, as you know, we are undertaking work now on the review of the city's special events bylaws, where we do have an engage Ottawa page and a full engagement plan. We will try to tackle some of these issues through that work, but specifically on the bubble bylaw, no, we will not be able to execute a full engagement plan for Q1 of next year.
So when the feasibility study comes back, that won't be recommending a bubble bylaw. It will just be talking about the feasibility. Will it be making a recommendation on whether, like, will it have the parameters of what the bylaw would look like? Or is it just a study on whether or not it's feasible to implement one?
Mr. Mayor, I would suggest that it's too early to tell. We would have to complete that work first to determine what approach staff would be recommending then at that time.
Okay. You know, I have a lot of reticence to the fact that we're going to be considering a feasibility of something without full public consultation on that. I'll just mention as well, my colleague, Councillor Curry, mentioned about being on the police board, and I would encourage not only reaching out to the police, but the police board as well. As everyone would know, there was a convoy of the audit, and we need to create a major events policy, but we also have in our policy suite for the board, there's a public order policy, police action at labor disputes. I know you said nothing to do with labor. We have a significant amount of consultation, some of which has already started, and you know, there's overlap there, and I would hope that we're not going in two different directions with respect to these items. Again, I'll just say, you know, I'll support looking at a feasibility study, but it will be my expectation when this comes back that there will be a full opportunity for everybody to engage. I think that this is a significant issue, and I'm disappointed it came to council and it didn't come to committee, and that the timelines are so tight that we don't have the opportunity to hear from everyone. And I'll be expecting that when it comes back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Luloff.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I'm about as close to a free speech absolutist as you can get. You know, I helped to shepherd in the most permissive intellectual freedom policy in North America at the Ottawa Public Library. And I believe that protest is an expression of displeasure, and it's an important tool to advocate for what you believe in. My issue is when it's not the intended recipient of the vitriol that suffers as an externality. You know, Centertown definitely understands this very well. Innocent seniors at the retirement home adjacent to the JFO understand this very well. Countless civil servants who are just often just going about their business at their departments understand this very well too. So it's when innocent people are used as pawns in an argument to which they aren't a party that we need to be considerate. It's definitely we're definitely on a razor's edge here, though. I think that it is a noble intent that we are pointing at here. And while it might be a noble intent, there are certainly these externalities that we need to consider. So I think that I'll hear staff out on this. I think it's prudent to consider the arguments on this, even if you don't accept them. And I'll certainly reserve the right to reject it outright when this report is tabled. But let's have the conversation. Let's see what we come back with. Let's hear from experts, and let's consider this. Because yes, some of the rights and natural rights that we have as human beings, or the ones that we are afforded by government, come with responsibilities, and sometimes those responsibilities are not respected by those that are yielding those rights. And sometimes that causes unintended consequences to other people that aren't a party of the discussion. I think that's something to consider. But at the same time, I don't want to do anything here in the city of Ottawa that curtails the ability for people to express their displeasure when it comes to those that they elect to represent them. So let's have the conversation. Let's see where this goes. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Luloff. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much. So I wasn't going to speak until I heard the previous speaker, and I think that they did a really good job at articulating where I'm coming from. So certainly residents in College Ward have been asking for greater support from their local government. There's been a lot of pain, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. You know, students at Sir Robert Borden experiencing anti-Semitism in their schools from their peers. You know, individual homes being targeted. It's been a very upsetting time, and you know, I think my constituents would like to see the exploration of what tools would be possible. When I was first elected, I had a friend sort of who is a little suspicious of government, which I think no matter where you are on the political spectrum, people are suspicious of government. And they said, you know, just go in there and try and do less harm or undo harm. And so when we're entering into this next phase of the study, I'm going to very much keep that in mind. We want to make sure that whatever comes out, whatever recommendations we see, we're elected here to do less harm or undo harm. And that's going to be the balance that we're trying to see here when we have people who are feeling harmed everywhere. And I don't know whether a bubble bylaw is going to be able to solve for individual experiences of harm, but I know that residents are asking us to consider it, and the committee is the right place to do that, because we can then invite residents to express to us how they imagine both the harm, or how they can describe both the harm that they're feeling, but how they imagine us doing less harm. And to echo what my council colleague has said, you know, I have been under some pressure to move ahead with a bylaw because of the spirit and intent. So when you said noble intent, that was really what was coming up for me. And to, you know, move forward with this, with its intent, and the details can get worked out afterwards. But I will not be able to look at protected rights and freedoms under the Charter as a detail that will fall out afterwards. That will have to be demonstratedly protected and irrefutable for something like this to move forward, because those are my rights, those are everyone's rights, and we don't get to decide the baddies or the goodies of protest. Protest is an individual freedom, regardless of what side of a political issue you're on. So those are the variables that we're playing with in this bubble bylaw. So without a doubt, I want to do less harm. And if this conversation can help us have a general understanding of what that looks like for residents, I'll be prepared to have it. But it cannot come at a cost of individual rights and freedoms, because those are second to none. So I just wanted to, you know, support my council colleague that came before me. I thought his description of the issue is very apt, and I'll be supporting the motion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I appreciate the conversation this morning. I'll speak first to a comment I heard from one of my colleagues about, you know, the Canadian soldiers and the blood and sacrifice and treasure that's gone across this world to try and improve democracy. And without a doubt, that is one of the things that I'm most proud about, our Canadian forces and how they do exactly those things in order to help build up fledgling democracies. And a key component of that is to improve freedoms. Freedoms of things like speech, freedoms of assembly, religion, opinion, the opportunity to gather and have debate, which is what makes, you know, Canada, our province in Ottawa, so great. But I'm not going to focus on freedoms in this conversation because I think that's been talked about a lot. Without a doubt, nothing that we do can compromise those freedoms. Point for now. And I'm more than confident that our staff are going to be able to look at this and do that analysis. But what I really want to talk about is our duty of care. So we're essentially the board of governors for this corporation. And we do have a duty of care to our residents. And I would ask all of us to take a look at the trends over the last 5, even 10 years, and to ask if we, as a corporation, are fulfilling our duty of care to our residents. We have a responsibility for public health. We have a responsibility for public safety, for security. There are numerous examples from across the political ideological spectrum of places where there have been breaches to our duty of care. People have been made unsafe. Elderly, young, teachers, full spectrum. This is not a political discussion about content. The debate issue is secondary. This is about our fiduciary duty of care to the residents of Ottawa. We have a responsibility to them to put in place the systems that will best allow for all the charter freedoms to be protected and to be endorsed and to be implemented, but we can't overlook the fact that we don't want people to feel intimidated or to feel hate or to be violated, to be hurt, and we can't let us get into that space. I would suggest that enabling a motion that will further that conversation is nothing but positive, because we do have, as the governors of this corporation, a duty of care to do the best we can. Right now, I don't think we're doing the best we can. There's been a lot of good discussion about enforcement. There is absolutely an enforcement issue here, but that's not something we can physically put our thumb into, nor should we. All we can do is set the conditions so that our police, our bylaw, have the tools in order to make the best judgments on the ground based on the tactical situation, based on the threats, based on the concerns that they have about bystanders and such. At present, do they have enough laws to allow that? Some people have made that argument. Some people will continue to make that argument. They probably do. However, this will set a tone at the top of supporting our bylaw, of supporting our police, and of enabling them with tools where otherwise they may not have them. I don't dispute the fact that from time to time, there are potentially opportunities for the police to enforce certain things, but they make the discretionary judgments at that time to perhaps not do so. That frustrates some people, but at the end of the day, they are the ones on the ground looking at the problem and saying, if I actually do this enforcement action, this could cause a substantially worse outcome. So by looking at the option of preventing that situation from happening at the beginning, before it even takes place, I think is a viable conversation for staff to have and to then brief us on. So, Mr. Mayor, it has been my pleasure to work with Councillor Hubley on this and yourself. I do strongly support that we allow staff to go back to take a look at this to see what options are available, and then we have a further debate at that time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Hill, and I want to thank all of my council colleagues for your thoughtful comments on this and for sharing your concerns and the conflicted feelings you have in some cases about this. I think this has been a healthy discussion, and this is what our residents expect of us when we're dealing with an issue of this nature. So thank you all for your thoughts. So let's vote on the motion, please, on a recorded vote.
Councillor Leeper.
Yes.
Councillor Gower.
Yes.
Councillor King.
Yes.
Councillor Dudas.
Yes.
Councillor Kitts.
Yes.
Councillor Kelly.
Yes.
Councillor Bradley.
No.
Councillor Hubley.
Yes.
Councillor Troster.
Yes.
Councillor Johnson.
Yes.
Councillor Devine.
No.
Councillor Luloff.
Yes.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor Menard.
No.
Councillor Lowe.
Yes.
Councillor Curry.
Yes.
Councillor Brockington.
Yes.
Councillor Jarush.
Yes.
Councillor Hill.
Yes.
Councillor Carr.
Yes.
Councillor Giroux.
Yes.
Councillor Plante.
Oui.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Councillor Brown.
Yes.
Mayor Sutcliffe.
Yes.
22 yeas, 3 nays.
Thank you. Item 21.2 is the issue about boundaries between wards 9 and 24. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not sure how much I need to speak to this, but we're just, Councillor Devine and I are just sort of seeking a slight adjustment to our ward boundary, I guess, for the next municipal campaign that shifts it up from the Greenbelt boundary to Fallowfield Road. Full disclosure is that Fallowfield Road is an important commuting corridor for my residents, for Council Hill's residents as well, and there have been some administrative, mostly administrative frustrations, we'll say, in it going through Ward 9, and no, nothing to do with Councillor Devine. It's just the way the boundary is set up right now. So I'm hoping for your support. I'm obviously going to support it, but thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Motion carried. Thank you. Okay, there are no motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure, no notices of motion that I'm aware of. So a motion to introduce bylaws. Councillor Hubely.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, that the bylaws listed on the agenda under motion to introduce bylaws, 3 readings, be read and passed.
That carried. Confirmation bylaw.
That the following bylaw be read and passed to confirm the proceedings of the council meeting of October 30th, 2024.
Is that carried? Thank you. Inquiries. Councillor Johnson, I believe you have an inquiry.
The City of Ottawa's public engagement strategy is guided by the following vision: a city where public engagement is valued as an important part of the decision-making process and is inclusive, meaningful, accountable, and responsive to the public's perspectives and needs. Despite this commitment, residents frequently share their frustration about the engagement process. As we have moved to an online model of consultation, there are fewer opportunities to attend in-person meetings, speak with staff directly, or ask questions. Residents believe the outcome of consultation is often predetermined and their feedback has limited influence. Municipalities across the country are facing significant challenges which will require careful decision-making. It's vital that residents can become informed about key issues and to weigh in by identifying their priorities. Some cities like Calgary are grappling with how to move forward, while others like Guelph and Vancouver have already implemented comprehensive strategies. In 2024 January, a memo was circulated to the Mayor and members of Council to provide an update on improvements to online engagement, staff training, upcoming initiatives to begin updating elements of the public engagement strategy. So I have the following questions. I'm sorry this is so long. So PIMR indicated that the requirement to register before participating in a survey had been eliminated to reduce barriers to participation. A scan of surveys currently posted on Engage Ottawa reveals an inconsistent approach, with some surveys still requiring participants to log in prior to providing feedback. Also, a variety of approaches and survey designs are used. This approach produces inconsistent data that cannot be used effectively to draw reliable or confident conclusions, particularly when attempting to compare results across programs or over time. How can all of this be improved to create better consistency across departments and ensure that Council has the reliable evidence it needs to make evidence-based decisions? 2, new public engagement training was launched for staff in 2024. How many employees participated in the new training? Has a target been established for how many staff will complete the training in 2025? How can the city encourage participation across different departments and seniority levels to ensure employees that interact with the public have the necessary skills? Number 3, a list of upcoming initiatives for updating elements of the public engagement strategy was provided in the memo. Can staff provide a brief update on the progress made for each of the tasks? Developing new tools, revising existing tools, clarifying guidelines, establishing a cross-departmental public engagement network, launching a public engagement newsletter and improved tracking system, conducting a review of supports required to train and develop city facilitators, issuing a RFP to supply the platform that serves as the back end of the public engagement tool. In partnership with the Office of the City Clerk, launching a campaign to inform the public on how to engage with the city, including increasing awareness and education of the city's governance structures and participation opportunities on advisory committees, departmental working groups, and local boards. Building on the 2023 campaign that promoted ways to engage with the city, it focused on 2024 budget. Does staff have the sufficient resources to update the public engagement strategy, or will there be a request for additional FTEs in 2025? Can staff share how they have leveraged support from the Bloomberg Philanthropy City Data Alliance to support this project?
And number 5, will the public engagement strategy consider the development of a civic education program similar to City Hall School implemented in Calgary? What resources would be required to introduce a municipal governance educational program? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other inquiries? Oh, Councillor Card, I see your hand is up.
Hi, can I ask a question to Councillor Johnson on her inquiry?
No, I don't think
I can't?
so. I don't think it works that way, does it?
Oh, I just wanted to ask, she mentioned that City Hall...
Hang on, Councillor Card, just a second. We're just getting clarification whether there can be questions about inquiries or inquiries about questions.
Mr. Mayor, generally when an inquiry is introduced, there's no opportunity for questions. The response from staff will be listed on a future agenda, likely Finance and Corporate Services Committee.
So you would have the opportunity then, I guess.
Okay, so if I wanted to ask if the City Hall School is actually in Edmonton and not Calgary?
We just clarified that you can't ask. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn, Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm not going to take any questions on this motion. That the proceeding of the City Council meeting of October 30th, 2024 be adjourned.
Is that carried? Thank you, everyone. Merci. Do you want to?
Good afternoon. Bonjour à tous. My name is Kendra Titley and I will be your moderator today. Je m'appelle Kendra Titley et je serai l'animatrice de ce point de presse aujourd'hui. I will now invite each agency in alphabetical order to ask their questions. You may ask one question with a follow-up. Par ordre alphabétique, j'invite maintenant chaque organisme à poser une question et une question de suivi. We'll start with Elise Skura at CBC Ottawa.
Thanks very much. My first question is about the discussion over the bubble zone. And we heard some concerns today about, or maybe just trepidation about the moving forward too quickly. I wondered how the city is going to ensure that all of the groups that might have concerns about this are properly consulted in the time that's allowed.
I think it was is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. I think it was a great discussion today, a very healthy discussion, and I heard a lot of concerns raised that have been raised by members of the community, and I think it was, frankly, I heard a lot of concerns raised that have crossed my own mind. Obviously, there is no easy answer to the kinds of challenges that we're talking about here, and there's no simple solution. But I certainly understand and defend the right for everyone to be able to protest and demonstrate, and to the labor movement as well. But I also understand why many people are upset about events that have happened or could happen near a school or a place of worship or another community gathering space. So I think we need to proceed cautiously. I think we need to proceed in a way that allows for a lot of public consultation, and that's why nobody is proposing a bylaw at this point, or putting a motion forward that would move quickly towards implementing something. We're going to take the time to study the feasibility of it. When that report comes back, we will evaluate our options at that time. Perhaps we will decide not to go any further. Perhaps we will decide to do something additionally at that point. All of our options are available, and I imagine, I expect and I would hope that there will be a lot of public consultation around this, and lots of public feedback as well, whether we do that through a formal process, which I would expect, or whether in addition to that, there's also just a lot of discussion and debate in the community.
My second question is something completely different. The Rural Summit is coming up now, and I just wondered, what are the kinds of issues that you hope are going to be brought up by members of the public?
I'm very excited about the Rural Summit on Saturday. This is something that I talked about during the campaign, and that I've been speaking with rural residents about ever since I became mayor. It's, I grew up in the urban part of Ottawa, maybe the sort of outer urban area of Ottawa, but I've always had a connection to the rural parts of our city. Members of my family live there, and through my work as a journalist and broadcaster, I spent a lot of time in the rural parts of the city. And I know that rural residents want to ensure that they are able to protect and maintain their quality of life, and that the farming community wants to make sure that the decisions we take at City Hall are not overlooking their needs, their unique needs. What's special about Ottawa is that we have this wonderful city that includes an urban component, a suburban component, and a rural community. Lots of other cities don't have that. I see it as a strength and an asset to our city. So I'm looking forward to drawing on all of the feedback that's taken place at the meetings that have already been held on the Rural Summit over the preceding weeks and months. I attended a couple of them, and there were some great discussions happening there, and bringing forward some rural solutions for rural residents, bringing forward some steps that we can take as a city and as a community to ensure that we're never overlooking the needs of rural residents, and that we continue to allow them to do, to live their lives in rural communities, and we continue to allow farmers to do what they need to do to serve us, and that we continue to maintain this wonderful diversity we have in our city that combines not just a downtown core and some wonderful suburbs, but this amazing rural component to our city. Oui. Alors, pendant ma carrière comme journaliste,
during my career as a journalist,
j'ai parlé souvent avec les résidents ruraux d'Ottawa.
I had the chance to talk to the rural resident of Ottawa.
Des événements qui contribuent à
Sometime we had events
de ville ne sont pas en accord avec les besoins des résidents.
Sometime within the city of Ottawa, the council, we don't take into account their needs. It's important for us to hold that summit this weekend. We need to listen to rural residents.
Les décisions du conseil municipal
council's decision have to take into account the comments of rural residents when we're establishing our priorities, especially when we're making a decision that will have an impact on rural residents. We've put a process in place. We will be discussing solutions on Saturday. This is the start of a new era. We want to make sure that their voice are heard, that we consult rural residents before making a decision. We will listen to the proposed solutions. There will be debates. We will be able to hear them.
Thank you. We'll go to Austin Lee at CTV Ottawa.
Thanks for taking my question. First question, just about the bubble zone bylaw. If you could just kind of reiterate and expand on why you voted to move ahead with this.
Once again, I have deep respect, especially as a former journalist, for everyone's right to free speech, everybody's right to demonstrate. It's vitally important in our democracy. At the same time, and that's why these issues are often, bring a lot of internal conflict and a lot of thought that I think you saw reflected in the debate today. At the same time, I have heard from many residents in our community about concerns they have about a number of different events that have taken place or could take place in the future near schools, near places of worship, near other important cultural and community institutions in our city. So we must strike the right balance going forward, but I support the idea of assessing the feasibility of a bubble bylaw, as it's often called, looking at the examples of what's been done in other communities, making sure that anything we do respects the right of people to demonstrate and to strike, and is able to withstand legal challenges. So if we are to do anything, I think it will come with a lot of consultation. I think it will come with a lot of careful thought and debate. But ideally, we can move forward with our residents believing that they have the right to demonstrate, they have the right to free speech, and that our residents also feel that when they're dropping their kids off at school or when they're attending a service in their place of worship, that they can feel safe doing so.
Okay, a follow-up question, not along the same lines, but obviously the tabling of the budget is quickly approaching. I'm wondering if you have any kind of a tangible update on your Fairness for Ottawa campaign, any financial commitments from the province or from the federal government?
Oh, I forgot to mention that, no. We're continuing to talk, and the discussions have been collaborative and constructive. but I don't have any news yet. So the discussions are continuing, and I remain hopeful that the federal government and the provincial government will do the right thing and support the city of Ottawa as we face these historic challenges.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Sarah McFarlane, iPolitics.
Hi.
All right, I'm about a foot shorter, so thanks for taking my question. So just when we're looking at things from a local lens, we had the recent announcement from the federal government about dropping down some immigration targets quite substantially. I'm curious how that looks from an Ottawa perspective, how that impacts us, whether we can continue to keep up with that growth, or if we should be looking at scaling things back even more.
Scaling what things back?
Just as far as population growth, whether our infrastructure
Right.
is supporting.
Our population growth estimates? Yeah. So great question. And frankly, I have the same question, and I've been asking that question. I think it's too early to know at this point what the impact of those changes will be. But you know, I think there is a sense, and I think there is a consensus that that the recent influx of new arrivals in Canada has put pressure on municipal services, and I don't think anybody can dispute that. We've been struggling to keep up with the rise in the number of new people arriving in our city. I don't think that's a challenge we should face alone, and we're grateful for the support that we've received from other levels of government, but we still need to do more. It's going to take time to figure out how we continue to respond to the thousands and thousands of people who have arrived in Ottawa already, and it's taking time to provide the services to them that they require. So I'm not sure exactly how long it will take for us to catch up, even if there is a reduction in the number of new arrivals in the future. So we need to learn more to really be able to answer those questions. But I think it's healthy for us to continue to have conversations with the federal government in particular about how we need to welcome people to our country and to our city. I believe in immigration. My parents were immigrants to Canada. It's very important for our economy, but it has to be done in a carefully managed way to ensure that it doesn't put pressure on municipal services, and it also is the right experience for the people who are arriving in this country seeking to contribute to our society.
Okay, very quick follow-up. I'm just curious if you're concerned that there will be any negative impacts on the local workforce, specifically maybe the restaurant industry, those kinds of industries that rely quite heavily on this population growth.
If a reduction in the number of immigrants, I haven't heard that feedback from members of the business community yet, but I'll be interested to see how that plays out. I think, you know, all we've heard so far is really just that the target's going to come down, and I think we need time to sort out exactly how that's going to play out. So I'm sorry I'm not fully answering your question, but I have the same questions you do about what the implications will be on municipal services, on the economy, and on all of the other consequences of these kinds of decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On va à Charles-Antoine Gagnon, le droit.
Bonjour. Je pense que ma question va s'adresser au
Good
personnel
morning.
municipal.
My question is for city staff regarding Mrs. Plante's motion on the shelters. I was not covering city politics back then, but could you explain to me what was the maximum, what's this issue of a maximum of 4 shelters that she wants it to be maintained, but it was voted against today? Okay, well, I can explain to you, but there was a plan without a maximum on the number of shelters per ward, and without a motion by council that would go on without a maximum. That's what happened today. Now there is no limit on the number of shelters per ward. Well, to be clear, it was limited to 4 in Ward 12, is that it?
On peut faire un
We-
suivi avec vous après.
Was there a limit before and now there isn't? Is that true?
You can answer in English, it's no problem.
Okay. Did you want to speak to that, Wendy?
Yeah, oui, c'est correct.
OK, alors il y avait une limite de 4 refuges. OK.
So there was a limit of 4 shelters. Okay.
C'est important de souligner. Je ne pense pas que
Yeah, but
personne veut
I don't think that
ajouter
anyone
plus de refuges,
wished to add more shelters to Ward 12. That's not the plan.
Alors, je pense que à l'avenir,
So I think that in the future,
prenons les décisions avec
we will base our decisions
et
following
c'est pas- c'est-
consultations, wide consultation. I think
pas avoir des limites.
it's the idea of not having any limits. It's not because there's we plan to increase the number of shelters in a specific ward.
Avez-vous des nouvelles de l'armée du salut et son plan
Have you heard anything from the Salvation Army in Montreal Road?
Avez-vous des nouvelles là-dessus sur ce qui se passe?
Do you have any news on that?
Moi, je n'ai pas de nouvelles.
Not
Je
me.
ne sais pas.
I don't
C'est
have.
peut-être une
I don't
question
know.
pour
Maybe it's a question for Salvation Army. Yeah, but they don't answer me. My emails are simply ignored. So I was wondering if you had more information. No, not so far. We didn't get any update from the Salvation Army.
We'll go to Blair. We'll go to Blair Crawford at the Ottawa Citizen.
Hi, Blair.
Hello.
Blair Coffin at the Citizen.
Related to today's meeting, but since you're here, I was speaking to Councillor Leeper this week about work that's being done along Scott Street, the newly completed Scott Street bike path, and it's being torn up by Hydro Ottawa to do some work that they need to do. And I'm just wondering if you could explain how, or if the city coordinates with other utilities like Hydro Ottawa, so that you're not ripping into newly created work. If you coordinate your some work done.
Yeah, there's actually extensive consultation and coordination that takes place between the city and with all of the utilities and also with a lot of the construction that's going on. The city really endeavors to try to reduce basically those conflict points or utilities having to come back afterwards. But sometimes the timing doesn't permit. There's certain works that need to proceed. We may not be aware, or Hydro may not even be aware of some of the works that were planned. Sometimes it comes up afterwards. So I can't speak to the specifics on this one. What I can say is that we do have extensive coordination and consultation.
And when they do work like that, they're responsible for bringing it back up to where it was before they started?
That's correct. They become responsible for the reinstatement.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. On va maintenant à Frédéric Papin, Radio-Canada.
Frédéric
Bonjour, restez
Pepin,
avec nous, Monsieur
Radio-Canada.
Gontier. On va donner une petite pause à Monsieur le maire.
We'll give a break to the mayor. Mr. Gontier,
Qu'est-ce qui va changer là
can
avec
you
le
tell
vote
us
fait? Parce
what
qu'il y a
will
une motion qui a
change
été adoptée du
with the
conseiller
garbage
Kelly.
issue?
Vous aviez
Because
recommandé
Councillor
à ce que
Kelly's
le
motion
staff
was
n'était pas pour
approved.
cette
You
recommandation-là.
said that the
Qu'est-ce que
staff
ça
was
change
not
concrètement pour
in
les
favor
résidents
of this
d'Ottawa? Et
motion.
est-ce
So
que ça
what
va-
will that
est-ce qu'il y a
change for
des
the
mesures de
Ottawa
restriction
residents? And will you be able to meet your objective of reducing the garbage per household? The motion approved by council today is not in line with the initial plan. We wanted a longer transition for those who have an overcapacity, over 140-liter containers. We wanted to have alternate measures of it. So far, what we've seen, we talk about 4 weeks for the implementation of the transition period before, and we saw that some adjustments were made for some communities. So we don't anticipate an increase of people going to buy larger containers, but we just wanted to have a longer transition period. For those who have bigger containers, we want to offer them options.
And maybe add on that, are you going to be able to respect the objectives of sending less garbage to, that's the objective.
Yeah, ultimately the objective is less than sending less waste to the landfill site. The motion that was approved today by council, in essence, the impacts of that is for those that have containers that exceed the allowable limit in the bylaw, it provides those residents with a longer transition period. So instead of transitioning between now and December, it adds another 6-month period to that. What I will state though is that, as I mentioned to council, is we've already seen a lot of changes in the community in terms of adapting to the new bylaw requirements. We've seen significant reductions in terms of those that had oversized containers and also those that were exceeding the 3-item limit. So we're actually seeing a very high compliance rate. Our focus will continue to be to work with those residents that have those oversized containers around options to them and how we can transition them away from those oversized containers. But it doesn't change our focus around reducing waste.
OK, Monsieur le maire. Donc, j'aimerais aussi vous entendre sur les bulles. Parlez-moi, les bulles pour...
Can you actually go back on the bubble bylaws? So you're talking about a study? Can you explain a little bit more? The person said that you have a very short timeline for this study. Do you think that you will have enough time to study these different scenarios? And how will you find the balance? It is very important to strike the right balance because we have two priorities here. We have to mention that this is only the beginning of a process. When we will receive the report in 2025 with different options, this will not be the end of that process. Then the council will have to vote on a bylaw. We will have to consult with the public. So more than one step in this process. So we have to go step by step. And this first step is only the feasibility study. Then we will be able to propose a motion. So there could be public consultation, isn't it? Eventually, part of that process, it could involve public consultation.
Yeah, I think it's important to underline that if, this is a feasibility study. We did not ask staff to develop a bylaw, bring back a bylaw, and then we're going to vote on the bylaw early in 2025. That's not the process here. What the process is that staff are going to study the feasibility, look at all of the factors that would affect whether a bylaw is feasible or not, bring that back in a report. They might make a recommendation, they might not make a recommendation. Council can then act on whatever is in the report or not. If council decides at that point to move forward with some type of bylaw, then there is a process that would begin to advance a bylaw, and that process would include public consultation and further work that would be done. So it's not that we're going to be voting on a bylaw in the first quarter of 2025 and it's going to take effect 3 days later. There would be a process that would follow after we act on the report.
Thank you.
Is that what we said today? Was first? Yeah. Wait.
Merci. This concludes today's media availability. Ceci conclut le point de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Merci.